There was a conversation I had with someone who I trust, who got very emotional and described a friend of his dying on the moon. I've spoken to over a dozen people, probably 15 plus people, who operate, either have operated or are operating inside what we would call the legacy retrieval of non-human craft and reverse engineering program. I think one of the most galling, shocking moments for me was when people that I was talking to in the program, who are still in the program, admitted to me that we're using high-pulse microwave weapons, HPMs, to
take them down.
Craft.
Have we purposely murdered other beings?
Oh, God, that's a horrible thought, isn't it?
Have we?
I suspect we have. I've asked them what happened to the beings, and I just get a squeamish look.
Whew. Do you believe that some of the people you've spoken to, Jake included, David Grush included, are closer to the program than they let on?
I can't say.
Well, I think you just did.
When people know what I was talking about.
Sure.
I mean,
when you say when people know?
Oh, they will know. I'm pretty sure it'll become public.
Is it outside of the Five Eyes?
Oh, you could definitely see it on a satellite. It's a building. I've said it's a building.
It's a building. Is the building the shape of the craft?
Yeah. At 10:30 at night, he puts the blindfold over his eyes, and within a few seconds, he says, "I'm engaged." I said, "What do you mean you're engaged?" He says, "I'm in a craft." He says, "Horizon." And I look towards the horizon, and there are these two golden white orbs that just appeared on the horizon. These objects do come closer. And I'm just like, holy hell. I was excited. I thought, wow, that was really something. But I was kind of disappointed for Jordan because we hadn't seen what he said he was going to see, which was the blue hexagon. Almost simultaneously at the moment that I'm saying to Jordan, gee, real shame that we didn't see the blue hexagon, you see a blue hexagonal orb exactly as Jordan had predicted.
Is there a piece of information you wish you were never told?
Yeah, there is. I was given the names of, and it wasn't Jake, I was given the names of people who ordered the murder of his team.
Documentary photographer and a former military intelligence guy, which I can prove with IDD 214. It's fall of either sometime between 80 and 83. We can't remember for sure. We're coming back from a trip to the Ozarks, and we were on Highway 96 between Springfield and Joplin, heading west back towards Kansas, when suddenly we weren't. My mom remembers waking up behind the wheel of a moving car on a gravel farm road to learn that I was also ill. My sister, myself, the dog vomited, and my mom knew that she had lost time based on the dashboard clock reading. She knew time had passed. 2 weeks later, my mom saw a craft land in the park across the street from our house in the small town we lived in. And two beings got out of the vehicle and walked towards her in the park. And she had a telepathic communication experience with these two beings. And they gave the message that they were there to check on us and to make sure that we were doing okay. And two beings re-entered the craft. It took off and vanished. That's where my story starts.
All right, I think we can get started here. You good to go?
Let's screw this cat.
And then we can start the podcast. Welcome, Ross Coulthart.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thank you for making the trek. Obviously, all the way from Australia. I know you've got an engagement coming up in in Los Angeles, which is still quite away from where we are sitting right now.
Yeah, my brain is still somewhere over the Pacific, so I hope you're kind to me and not too ruthless as you ask me with questions.
Yeah, not too bad. I do have some questions here. I have some notes which I'll eventually defer to, but I have a feeling that our conversation is just going to flow quite naturally. We've been, sharing some time together prior to the podcast, went out for dinner, and lack of conversation wasn't necessarily a problem.
It was fantastic. It's actually really lovely to finally get to meet you, to be perfectly honest.
Likewise.
It's also really lovely to look behind the scenes. I've always died to see the Area 52 set, and I now know the secret of Area 52. It's great.
Yeah. Also, if you ever see me sort of peering over my shoulder, it isn't completely out of paranoia, but I am a one-man crew here, so I'm just making sure that everything is still rolling in case there are some technical difficulties. So it has nothing to do with me being bored by what you're saying, or
it's absolutely fine.
Don't take offense to any of that. Other than that, Ross, you've continue to lead one of the most interesting lives, I think, of anyone, and not just anyone in the UFO space. We have this microcosm going on, and this sort of little closed echo chamber biome that we live in that is, ufology. But you've led such an interesting, amazing life outside of that, from being a world-famous reporter.
I don't know about that.
Well, I do. You're part of the most prestigious programs, news programs that have ever existed. But now you've quite successfully, I might add, transitioned, not unlike myself, into this space.
Do you know, I don't see it as a transition at all. All I see myself doing is applying the same skill set that I've used in journalism for the rest of my career on a subject that, frankly, I honestly didn't intend to come to the conclusion that I did come to about the whole UFO subject matter. I've spoken about this before, but I set out 8 years ago with the arrogant confirmational bias assumption that this was all an American black program, that what we were talking about here were craft, definitely. They can't not be craft. I think we're at the point now where we know that these are physical objects. They're detectable. The US is admitting that there's this phenomena, this unidentified anomalous phenomena, but they maintain the fiction that they have no idea what it is. They don't know if it's extraterrestrial. And I guess I started out with very much the journalistic assumption, well, this must be the Yanks. It must be the Americans. And I was shocked because I'd assumed there'd been a lot of reporters that have done the same work that I've done, because the thing that really sits with me is this should have been done 20, 30 years ago by a New York Times, Washington Post, LA Times, Boston Globe investigative team, applying the same degree of rigor to the UAP subject as we would to any subject, whether it be, systemic child abuse in the Catholic Church or the origins of the COVID-19 vaccine. Journalism does this kind of work. So I honestly don't think that it's exceptional that I've directed my gaze to the UFO subject.
It was a natural progression.
It was a natural progression.
And an underserved market, really.
Yeah, I'm just deleting my phone here, sorry.
Yeah, I'll shut mine off as well. Probably a good idea with what we're going to be talking about. Let me shut this down here. I think, I relate to that a lot as a magician, I think. To me as well, people see this other channel that I had created. I spent a decade sort of nurturing and building to all of a sudden, turn my gaze to this stuff. But for me, it very much aligns with the mysteries that I was uncovering before, which were just, sleight of hand mysteries and misdirection.
But it's funny, you probably a bit like me thought when you came into this subject matter, you were going to discover the feint of hand, the sleight of hand that was responsible for concealing, obviously, the American aerospace program that's behind all of this.
Yeah.
And that was my implicit assumption. I thought there must be, and there is. There is a part of the legacy program that's working with, I believe, crafts that are far beyond known human kin.
Now, when you say that, is that a gradual sort of rising conviction through the conversations that you've had with people, or was there a turning point for you that just went, holy cow? Now there's all sorts of incidents, and I'm sure that have happened, in the past that are incredibly credible. The one which I think was really interesting was the one that happened in New Zealand. Which was in 1978, the Kaikōura, I think, the Kaikōura incident. Yeah, pardon me. That was amazing because we have footage of this, we have pilots, we have military, we have all this corroborating evidence of like this thing happening. Was there an event like the Kaikōura event that kind of tipped you to, oh no, there 100% is something?
Yeah, there was. And it's funny because I can remember it really clearly. I remember my dad, who was a doctor in a small country town in New Zealand, telling me on a particular night that he had seen a UFO. And he told the local cop, the local policeman in the little town that we lived in, that he'd seen a UFO. And the policeman had talked to him about how he'd also seen it and that he'd reported it. And I logged that in my brain in that period of 1978 because the Kaikōura incident came up very soon afterwards in December. It was probably a week, or I've forgotten the distance, but it was a very short period of time. And hilariously, when I started researching the December 1978 Kaikōura incident, I couldn't believe it because there in the files was the logged report from the local policeman from the town that my dad was in, confirming that he'd seen a craft.
Wow. So up until then, it was just a story your father had told you.
Yeah. Yeah, and Dad was a total skeptic. He didn't believe any of this bullshit. He, like everybody, including myself, defaulted to the idea that this is nonsense. We're not really talking about aliens. But the amazing thing was to actually see there in the New Zealand archives a report from a local policeman that confirmed what my dad had told me back then. And it was interesting because this was a period of time when, shortly before the Kaikōura incident, there'd been an incident involving a young fella called Frederick Valentich in Australia.
Yeah, he disappeared.
He disappeared in a light plane over Bass Strait, which is a strait of water between Tasmania, an island off the southern part of Australia. And sort of basically he flew out of Moorabbin in Melbourne Airport. And it's a very celebrated case. You would probably have heard about it. The last thing he said was, "It's not an aeroplane." And then you hear this kind of...
Oh, it's a haunting audio.
It's a haunting audio. And the official explanation to this day is he crashed into the water. Maybe he was flying upside down. And there's a whole lot of reasons why that's not plausible for that particular type of Cessna
There were
aircraft.
also eyewitnesses to something in the sky. There was even a witness that said there was a craft being sort of commandeered by a flying saucer that he saw.
I'm not so sure about that. That's one from a farmer, and it's an apocryphal story because it's hearsay.
It is hearsay.
But what is a good story is there's a photograph. There's a photograph of a very distant object shortly before, shortly.
At sunset, right?
At sunset.
I see. This is where I might disagree with that. I see a fly. I see a fly buzzing in front of the camera, and you kind of see its wings. So, but this is what we're left with. We're left with these details. But more importantly, we have this audio of Frederick Valentich.
Yeah. But you see, the interesting thing about that is probably before I got into this subject matter, I would have gone, okay, everybody was hyped up because of the Valentich story. I was hyped up because of what my dad told me he saw. So when the Kaikōura story came along, everybody in New Zealand and Australia were hyped up about UFOs. And we all went crazy for something that was just normal, natural phenomena. And I can remember at the time the reports in the newspapers very quickly asserted that what this was were squid boat lights, that in those days when you went squidding, the big fishing boats that were using the squid lights would beam these lights out on the water to attract the squid, and somehow those lights had refracted on clouds, and it gave a vaguely plausible explanation. What was fascinating was to read the declassified New Zealand archives files that showed that was complete nonsense. And the pilot, there was a guy...
They were caught on radar.
They were caught on radar. There was a guy called John Cordy at Wellington Airport, which was across Cook Strait at the bottom of the North Island, and John was still alive when I was writing my book. And I contacted John in Wellington. He was a lovely old duffer, and he had an absolute razor-sharp memory of what had happened that night.
Blenheim were reporting that people had seen strange lights off Blenheim. We had someone else ring us up and ask us if there was an aircraft flying over here because they could hear this funny whistling noise. And then we were seeing these things on the radar.
And he described how he and another controller, the other controller was the principal controller, but he was looking over his shoulder. They were looking at radar returns and objects moving around the Argosy cargo aircraft, a big lumbering Argosy cargo aircraft carrying newspapers up the east coast of the South Island from Christchurch to a place called Blenheim in the upper part of the South Island. And as Dennis Grant, Quentin Fogarty, and Davy Crockett, the implausible name Davy Crockett, were filming with a film camera from the cockpit window of the Argosy aircraft, objects coming up to the window of the aircraft.
Wow.
That movement is being corroborated in real time by the air traffic controllers in Wellington right across the water, probably 50, 60 miles away across Cook Strait. And the interesting thing was Dennis Grant, who ended up becoming a highly reputable political commentator and one of the top political correspondents in Australia. Dennis is still alive, and he's got his notes of what he recorded inside the aircraft.
Wow.
And those notes are corroborating what was being said back to the air traffic controllers at this time exactly. The object is in this position, 1 o'clock in front of the aircraft. It's exactly what John Cordy was saying he was seeing back in Wellington. It got even more interesting for me because, like everybody, when I was a little boy, in 1978, I was 16 years old. So I was a teenage kid. I just accepted the government explanation. Back then, the Prime Minister of Australia was a guy called Sir Robert Muldoon, and he was a cantankerous old bastard who was known for not brooking nonsense. And his instinct, and you could see this in the archives, was to shut this down as quickly as possible.
Right.
One of my first gigs in journalism was with the New Zealand Herald newspaper in Auckland, which is a sort of flagship newspaper in New Zealand. It's the main sort of national newspaper. And I was the young cub reporter. And one of the gigs that happened in Christmas time was Sir Robert Muldoon, by that time, was retired and living in his beach house at Christmas time. And for some weird reason, it was a tradition on the newspaper to go and interview Sir Robert Muldoon in his beach house. And he'd talk about whatever. And I remember I asked him, because I was fascinated about Kaikōura, I asked him about the Kaikōura incident. And this is only probably, 6 years later. He chuckled and referred to how the Americans wanted that shut down as quickly as possible.
Whoa.
Yeah.
The Americans wanted it shut down.
Yeah.
Incredible. That doesn't surprise me at all, but wow.
What's really interesting is John Cordy, who's now sadly passed away, he passed away about 2 or 3 years ago. John Cordy told me how it was obvious to him in the air traffic control tower in Wellington Tower, they were very unpopular for corroborating what Quentin Fogarty, the filmmaker, recorded.
They're being professionally reprimanded? Or?
Yeah. Basically, they suffered for speaking out publicly. And Quentin, who became a good friend of mine, Quentin Fogarty, was an Australian journalist, and he made a film called Let's Hope They're Friendly. He wrote a book called Let's Hope They're Friendly, because that's what he wrote. At the time when he was up in the plane, he thought, geez, let's hope they're friendly. And it was interesting for me because I had in teenage years, being acculturated, I'd quite naturally accepted the explanation that these were squid boat lights.
Yeah, or Venus. Or
Well, Venus didn't work at all.
No, because it wasn't up during that time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because even the New Zealand Air Force investigators accepted that neither explanation washed.
Yeah.
But that's what was put to the New Zealand public, and it was incredible how quickly it shut the whole thing down.
And when you see the footage, what's remarkable about this is that there are so many cases of these glowing discs that sort of emanate this orange roiling light around the craft. And when you look at this, although it seems a little out of focus, you're filming with this giant camera in an airplane trying to get this light, you see like a band of darker, or it looks like an unfocused disc.
Yep.
It's clearly not just round. There's like a band around the middle, which I thought was really interesting.
Well, I spoke to Bruce Maccabee about that. I mean, one of, I think, the most respected analysts of UFOs in the last 50 years is Bruce Maccabee, an American, I think he was a physicist.
Mm-hmm.
But he had a vague association with a quasi-defense agency, but he did a lot of UFO work on the side. And he had taken the film, a copy of the film, and analysed it for Quentin and the TV network back in Australia that was doing the story. And it was quite sensational because what Bruce found was that the movements of these objects were anomalous. And because you had this multiple corroboration, you had the pilot was called Bill Startup, Captain Bill Startup, which was a great name for a pilot. And he was a lovely man, really lovely guy. I got to meet him once, and he lived in Blenheim, nuts and bolts guy, absolutely no doubt in his mind about what he'd seen. And he was angry about the misrepresentations of this being him somehow making a mistake as a pilot.
Right.
You know, to him, that was a derogatory inference about his profession.
Yeah, it was a slight against his credibility.
Because what was commonly not reported was that there'd been other pilots on a previous flight the previous nights.
That's right.
That had seen these objects. So whatever they were, they'd been hovering in that area and doing these displays for quite some time. But the definitive evidence was when you had the hard evidence from the radar tower in Wellington. And the interesting thing was, it made no sense to me. I was shocked. For me, it was kind of an ontological shock to realize, I mean, I know governments lie, politicians lie all the time, but to hear from a former Prime Minister of New Zealand that this was done largely at the behest of the Americans. Why?
So bold.
And then there was the Westall case in 1966, which we're coming up to the anniversary of in April.
Wow, that's
April
right.
6th.
Yeah.
And when I was writing my book in plain sight, I heard about this case in Melbourne. And there's a great Victorian UFO investigation group, mainly led by a guy called James Rigney, who, by the way, was instrumental in securing the release of the Wilson Davis document. That's another story. But I approached James out of the blue, and I basically said, look, can I come down to Melbourne and talk to you? I'm really interested in the Wilson Davis document, but I'm also really interested in the Westall case. And he also told me about the Kelly Cahill case.
Oh, Kelly Cahill's case.
Another famous case.
Super fascinating.
Before a first date, it's basically a classified briefing. You see, you're running a scenario in your head, reviewing prior statements and calculating risk exposure. Haircut, secured. Car, detailed. Timeline of your last 3 texts, analyzed. But there is one non-negotiable before any high-stakes encounter. Deodorant. You see, I've been using Mando. And what I genuinely like about it is that it's a whole-body deodorant, not just pits. We're talking thigh folds, feet, anywhere that might compromise the mission. I use the solid stick every morning. It's powered by mandelic acid, which stops odor before it starts. It was created by a doctor who saw how often normal body odor was being misdiagnosed and mistreated. And it's clinically proven to block odor all day and control odor for up to 72 hours. That's not masking it, that's handling it. I've built it into my routine before shoots, live shows, and travel. Anything where confidence matters. And when you're walking into a first date like it's a diplomatic summit, that matters. So if you want to try America's #1 whole-body deodorant formula, go to shopmando.com and use code AREA52 for 20% off site-wide plus free shipping. Again, head to shopmando.com. Use code AREA52 for 20% off and free shipping. And support the show. Remember, don't mask it, Mando it.
And so I spent a weekend with James going around looking at the Kelly Cahill site. And then the great thing was I got to meet a whole lot of the people who'd been present at Westall as little kids.
The students, wow.
And I remember thinking, these people aren't lying. This is real. And then the absolute clincher, the absolute gotcha moment for me was when Andrew Greenwood, who'd spoken previously to James Fox anonymously, he met me. He was the teacher, the science teacher, who had been on the quadrangle with these kids when, on the 6th of April, 1966, they looked up over the field and there were either 2 or 3 or maybe 1, nobody's quite sure, there are differing witness accounts, 1 to 3 objects hovering over the school playground. And there are 100+ kids looking up at this objects, and they are metallic elliptical discs.
Yeah.
And as these kids watch, one of the objects lands in an area of forest, which is a place where the kids knew really, really well. And the hilarious thing is, the kids knew that land better than the military, who came in their droves and secured the site shortly thereafter. But there's a whole lot of stories, some of which I think, frankly, don't make sense.
Sure.
There's some elaborate stories where some people claim that they touched the craft, and I'm not 100% sure about that. But I am in no doubt that a group of kids got close enough to see the craft from probably 5 meters away.
Yeah, this is not unlike, the Zimbabwe incident as well at the Ariel school.
It's very like
similar.
The Rua story.
Yeah.
But what I love about the Westall story, and it's coming up for the 60th anniversary, and I'm going to be there for it, hopefully, is the military and the intelligence
Air
community
Force presence.
come in.
Yep.
Andrew Greenwood, the science teacher, speaks publicly to a local newspaper, a local a local suburban newspaper. And he says, I'm sure about what I saw, and there's the quotes of what he said in the newspaper are still available in the archives today. He gets, and this is why he agreed to talk to me, he gets a knock on his door late at night. He opens the door, and there's one man in Air Force uniform, Australian Air Force uniform, and there's another man in civilian clothes. And they basically threaten him, and he was angry about this, really angry. They threatened him that if he didn't shut up talking about what he'd seen, they would put around a story that he was an alcoholic and he would lose his job as a teacher. And that's why he didn't talk about it for most of the last 40, 50 years. And
Was he an alcoholic? Did he drink?
No,
Not at all.
No. Well, he probably had a glass of wine at Christmas time.
Sure, yeah.
No, he wasn't an alcoholic. He was a really decent, honourable man.
Wow.
Sadly, he's passed away as well. But he, in I think the last 2 years of his life, he agreed to give a television interview to me, and he talked very candidly about what he saw. And he was adamant about what he saw being not a craft. He was very precise and very scientific. He said whatever it was some kind of metallic, coloured, elliptical-shaped object. He couldn't say that it was solid because he didn't touch it. He was very scientific and very careful, but very, very precise. And it was very interesting because I'd say there's probably, a dozen corroborative witnesses that I've spoken to. And there's an Australian researcher who's done some phenomenal work, and he's spoken to over 160 witnesses. There are people who saw Americans on the scene, and this is really interesting. There was a base called the Royal Australian Air Force Base Sale, about 3 or 4 hours drive north of Melbourne, and the Americans had been operating a secret U-2 spy plane flying over the southern oceans to monitor for radioactive plumes, radioactive residue from either Russian nuclear testing or somebody else. It might have been suspicions about South Africa. I doubt if it was at that time. But Whoever
like
it
Vela
was,
satellite stuff, or like
whoever it was, the kids that I spoke to, now adults in their 60s, they described American Jeeps turning up, people wearing American uniforms turning up at the school. They described being threatened by men dressed in civilian clothes. The whole school assembly was told to shut up about it. There was a real attempt to clamp it down. But what I loved about these kids, they're still really cheeky today. They love talking about it now that they're in their 60s. And I'm so looking forward to seeing them in April, because for them, this was a life-defining moment.
Yeah.
All their lives, they have lived with this reality of what they've seen. And, you know, you've had groups like the Australian Skeptics gave me a Benk Fork Award because I was the journalist that said that, you know, I gave this credibility. And for no good reason at all, absolutely no scientific basis to their assertions. They just sweepingly dismissed all of the evidence given by these multiple witnesses, first-hand witnesses, and just said it's just a bunch of school kids getting excited and confabulating, and they were excited about the Frederick Valentich case, and it's all nonsense.
Yeah, still to this day as adults.
And if you hear the passion from those people, there is no doubt in my mind that they are telling the truth and that they saw something anomalous. And the kicker for me was Andrew Greenwood having the courage before he passed to speak publicly about the fact that he had been threatened by somebody from what he believed was either military or an intelligence agency.
American.
Why? Well, we don't know.
I see.
We don't know.
Right.
Why shut down a legitimate public inquiry into what was obviously anomalous phenomena? Why?
So, well, that brings me to an interesting question, because, you know, we're often faced with like this deliberate secrecy, this cover up, and we hear about it so much through the Men in Black and through all these other, you know, the legacy program. But at what point in today's sort of UFO sphere, do you think we go from deliberate secrecy to just sort of like institutional confusion? Because we are dealing with that as well. Like there is this, like with Congress and everything, I can't help but think that they don't know very much. Like it's the gestalt that I get. It's the feeling that I get when I listen to the news. It doesn't seem like very many people are in on anything. But then you hear about these Americans turning up at these sites. Like, what's the connection there?
Okay, I think there's been a change since 2017. I'm really lucky because I started talking to some quite senior people in Congress on background, like not on the record, before a lot of this became public and before the decision was made, for example, by the Pentagon to acknowledge in 2021 in that original report from their, I've forgotten what it was called at the time. It wasn't the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. It was some other ones of their stupid names.
Was it OSAP? No, it wasn't.
OSAP.
OSAP, yeah.
But they published a report in 2021 acknowledging that UAPs are real. Whatever they are, they're real. They're not something that can be discounted. That, for me, was a huge turning point in, I think, public awareness of the issue. But before that time, I would say that a lot of the people in Congress were genuinely oblivious, including, I can say this, members of the Gang of Eight.
Mm-hmm.
And I pulled rank with a few people I knew from other stories I'd done to get access to 2 members of the Gang of Eight in that period. And the Gang of Eight, as you would know, is a group of senior politicians, the Senate Majority Leader, the House Majority Leader, senior people, both sides of politics, who are entrusted to review in the oversight committees the most sensitive secrets of all. And it's largely because there is still, I think, a contumelious disregard in the intelligence community and the military for the idea of oversight by Congress, because they believe very strongly that Congress can't be trusted with secrets.
That's right.
And they're probably right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this lies at the heart of the cover-up of the legacy.
Is a lot of that unacknowledged special access programs. Like those things don't go through these sort of committee hearings.
So this hilarious categorization that they have for compartmentalized secrets, you know, we all know what a special access program is. It's essentially a secret, a compartmentalized secret. And then there are unacknowledged special access programs, and then the biggest one of all are the WUSAPs, the waived unacknowledged special access programs. The WUSAPs and the ASAPs, if you like, they are generally put before the Gang of Eight, and it means that there's still congressional oversight. The idea is that there's still congressional oversight by a group of trusted people who can be trusted with those secrets. And that, frankly, doesn't really work in practice. And there's still, I think, holding back of information.
There has to be.
By the CIA, by the defense community, because they don't trust.
They'll give them breadcrumbs and throw them a bone. But
and I mean, there's a whole series of histories. One of my favorite series of books is, histories of the CIA and how the CIA has basically hidden stuff from Congress over the years. And I put myself into their position as an intelligence agency trying to protect the security of operations they're trying to run. I'm not making excuses for them because the law says very clearly they are obliged to reveal this information to Congress, and accountability is enshrined in the Constitution, the US Constitution. So there is a legal requirement that this be done, but it hasn't been being done. But what I'm coming to answer your question, what I found was there were people who were denying knowledge to me of any kind of program categorically in about 2018, 2019, 2020. And then when I went back to them after that moment, when in 2021, the Pentagon had made the admission that there are UAPs, they were evasive. And I think what's happened in the interim is certain members of the Gang of Eight, not all of them, have been read in. They've been told. And I think this is what's going to be used as an attempt to rescue the tattered reputations of the Pentagon and the intelligence community when the truth does finally come out that they've been lying to the public and indeed to presidents for many decades. I think they're going to use the excuse that certain members of Congress over the years have been read in. For example, I'm pretty sure Senator John McCain was very much aware of the legacy retrieval reverse engineering program.
On what grounds?
I can't say.
Okay.
But I'm very sure that John McCain was.
Is that secondhand or firsthand information? Do you get that from someone who knew him, or do you get that from?
I get that from somebody who knew him.
Yeah. Very well?
Very well.
Okay.
Yeah. And I don't doubt for a moment that there have been key people in the Congress who've been entrusted with this information. And I think that's how, when it comes out in the wash.
By whom though? Like that, because by another government entity that's unacknowledged, or by some faction that's completely removed?
There really is, as batty as this sounds, there really is a control group.
A cabal of like.
I had a situation when I was talking to David Grush, and David Grush.
Sorry, the control group that you just mentioned. You think that this is outside of any government jurisdiction? You think that
these are people working in government in a lot of the cases, but a lot of them, I'd say the majority of them, are people working in private aerospace.
Right, and they together form this other entity that doesn't abide by any rules.
I mean, they're in all of the well-known aerospace companies, Battelle, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman,
Raytheon.
Boeing, Raytheon. These are people who have been regarded as a safe pair of hands. Often they've come through the route of the CIA, science, technology. They're safe people to be entrusted with the secret, and they've been read in, briefed into the program, and periodically they will bring into the loop key politicians who are trusted. I'm thinking of one in particular. I'm not going to name him. I had an incident when I was doing some research a year ago, and I know what a certain senator was told by a source of mine, and I know he has lied to the public about what he's been told. And it's quite galling to me because he's clearly made a decision as a member of the Gang of Eight to completely mislead.
Democrat or Republican?
I can't tell you.
I have a feeling it's Democrat.
Oh, really? Okay, that's an interesting guess. But what I'm fascinated by is there's been a change. And I think what's happened is the legacy program were treating Congress with utter contempt and not briefing anyone. And that for a large part of the last 50, 60 years has been the status quo.
So they've no new friends.
Yeah.
Is the idea.
But what they've done in the last year or two, particularly, is they've started briefing in select senators in particular. I don't think they trust the House at all.
They've been doing that out of their hands are forced because of their dying out, or like what's the reason behind that, you think?
Oh no, I think they're scrambling to protect themselves.
I see.
In the event that this does become disclosed.
Right, and they get sued, or
I'm in little doubt that there is some kind of an executive order that regulates a quasi-legality to the continued secrecy of the retrieval reverse engineering program.
To national security.
People I've spoken to who are constitutional lawyers, really top constitutional lawyers, tell me that they cannot see any basis under which, for example, successive presidents could be bound into not being able to be briefed, even when they asked for it, like Clinton did, by, say, an executive order that was passed by Eisenhower or Truman. And it's not an apocryphal story, I'm told, that there is a secret executive order that was signed probably during the Truman administration. There was one also done during the Eisenhower administration, and that this enshrined the legacy retrieval reverse engineering program and kept it secret from Congress. I think this is what they're
out of plausible deniability for the president as well. And
I was trained as a lawyer, and I'm fascinated by what I think is one of the most beautiful documents on the planet, the US Constitution. I think it's an incredible statement of ideals. And the interesting thing to me is how those ideals have been corrupted, sadly, with this story, with the UAP program. Because of this inherent distrust of Congress, because they leak. Both sides leak all the time. As a journalist, I've in Australia, I've seen it for myself, where a politician, a defence minister, for example, ordered a leaks inquiry because of a story I'd done, and I knew he was the guy that had leaked me the information. That's what happens. And governments lie all the time about who's leaking information. They do it for a strategic advantage. And there is a problem with politicians that they do leak because they're covering their butts or they're trying to score a point against their rivals. The problem with that is that then you've got a situation that has developed with the legacy program where noble cause corruption happened, because this is process corruption. People inside the legacy program decided not to honour the terms of the Constitution and to ignore the obligation to report to Congress. And I believe trillions, not billions, trillions of dollars have been expended on this program without the knowledge of the consent of the American taxpayer, and certainly with no oversight, with very little oversight from Congress.
Well, I mean, Pentagon has failed every audit in forever.
Yeah.
And there's trillions of dollars missing prior to the 9/11 incident.
Well, we have to be careful about that. I mean, there's been misrepresentation of some of the things that Catherine Austin-Fitts, for example, has said. There are audit holes that mean they can't account for money.
Sure.
But they know that it's gone into a certain program. But as David Grush has explained in some of his interviews, including with me, they're using those programs to conceal this legacy program.
Yeah.
So that's how they do it.
Yeah, they'll charge you, $5,000 for a bag of bolts.
Yeah.
To these contractors and stuff, and that's kind of how they get away. It's criminal. Okay, you've, from my understanding, have gotten to speak to a lot of people that potentially, and I don't know that I can, verify any of this, but that potentially are, directly linked to some type of program. And these are your confidential sources. So I won't ask you about who these sources are, or, this is...
I couldn't tell you anyway.
And that's part of your journalistic integrity, and I think that that's really important to, adhere to as someone asking you these questions. I want you to have those connections, so I don't want to jeopardize any of that. But what I will ask you is, out of all of these claims, what's a claim that came to you that you couldn't report on, not because of national security or secrecy or giving up your source, but because it was like an incredible claim that you just couldn't verify? Is there anything that sticks out to you that just goes, well, it's an outlier, or it's, some type of anomalous piece of information?
The one thing I can't put my finger on and say categorically, hand on heart, I believe is real, but I suspect there's something to it, is the idea of a secret space program. And there was a conversation I had with someone who I trust, who got very emotional and described a friend of his dying on the moon.
Wow.
And
what do you make of that?
I didn't know what to make of it.
Because you have someone crying, telling you this. Like, clearly they're affected by the information they're giving you.
Yeah. Basically, I just don't know. I mean, I think a lot of the Corey Good claims, Darcy Weir's done a great show about this recently. A lot of the wacky claims about the secret space program, I suspect, are almost deliberate intelligence community disinformation to discredit the whole idea of a secret space program. What I'm talking about is what, oddly enough, Tom DeLonge has come closest to hinting at, which is that are we operating non-human craft that we've somehow been able to jury-rig using human psionic operators?
And using those craft to go to the moon and beyond, perhaps?
To the moon and beyond. I mean, I've even been told, one of the things I haven't been able to confirm or corroborate to my satisfaction, and normally when I corroborate something, I want to hear it from 2 or 3 independent witnesses who don't know each other. And I'm hearing the same consistent story. That's what I've heard from people about the legacy program. I've spoken to over a dozen people, probably 15 plus people, who operate, either have operated or are operating inside what we would call the legacy retrieval of non-human craft and reverse engineering program.
Wow.
I'm in no doubt whatsoever that exists. You're asking me, what have I been told about, but I haven't been able to confirm to my satisfaction?
That's right.
Is the qualitative nature of what's called the secret space program.
Are you referring to what, famously Gary McKinnon had also spoken about when he'd gotten into the back end of NASA and saw these ship names that weren't actual ship names and people he couldn't verify, and then seeing, this craft on a photo.
Yeah. I mean, I love the fact that one of them is called the Hillenkotter.
Right.
Because Roscoe Hillenkotter, of course, the founding director of the CIA.
And part of Majestic 12.
Part of Majestic 12 was also one of the biggest UFO disclosure activists of his time in the 1950s. So I love the idea that the Roscoe Hillenkotter is a secret spacecraft.
Tip of the hat.
If that's really the case. I don't know what to make of Gary McKinnon other than the fact that I find him highly credible. He doesn't strike me as somebody who's lying.
It's one of the few other corroborating sort of anecdotal pieces of evidence that we have confirming this secret space program, other than perhaps Hymashed, right, who also mentions this as well. And so
there are other data points, though, too. I mean, for example, there was in California, I think at Edwards Air Force Base, a separate astronaut program, and they were in training. They were being taught. They were non-NASA astronauts. They were US Air Force astronauts. And a lot of people don't know this. There was a separate space program that's officially acknowledged that was training astronauts for the US Air Force. Now, officially, that was shut down. I don't think it was.
You think it was just...
I think it went black.
You went black.
And I think what's happening is I suspect that they're operating out of deep underground military bases in different parts of the USA, continental USA.
Nothing to do with Space Force.
I suspect they are linked to Space Force.
But not directly, as in like these are people from Space Force going out there. Space Force is probably like, what do you make of it? I make of it more of like an intelligence gathering sort of unit.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of weird because Australia has actually started recruiting for its own equivalent of Space Force.
Really?
And ostensibly, that's for purely and simply data gathering, monitoring space junk and all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah, or keeping an eye on, satellites and NRO activity.
I don't know. I don't know whether the program that I'm describing is part of Space Force or not. I would be very surprised if the senior command of Space Force was oblivious to its existence.
Has anyone that you've spoken to from the program ever alluded to something like this?
Yes.
They have?
Yeah.
Were any of them sort of read in on these programs?
Yeah.
The secret space stuff?
Yeah. Or they claimed to be.
They claim to be. More than one?
No, just one. That's
just
why.
Just one.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the conversation that I had with somebody who described a friend dying on the moon.
How did they die?
I don't know. Wouldn't tell me.
He wouldn't tell you, but he said he was dying on the moon.
Died.
Oh, he died on the moon. What other information did they give you? Is that it? Is it? I had a friend that died on the moon and they started crying?
So frustrating. Do you get the feeling,
So
I
strange.
sometimes feel in this whole story, I'm walking through a room blindfold and I'm just grabbing stuff as I'm going through.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
And it's so frustrating. And the thing that really
You
gets
just want to
me,
shake someone sometimes, be like,
well, the thing that really
frustrates.
frustrates me is if people knew how hard it is to get even that.
Yeah.
You know, that conversation took 3.5, 4 years
To nurture.
to get that person to the point where they would sit down with me. They would not communicate on any known comms system.
Did you seek them out or did they find you?
Well, let's go to the basis of how I found people originally.
Sure.
The way I approached this as a journalist was to basically ask myself, if there was a program, what sort of people would be in it and what sort of scientists would be involved in it. And so I targeted particularly scientists and wrote letters to them, good old-fashioned handwritten letters, and posted them with a stamp on an envelope, knowing that that's non-digital, so reasonably less trackable. And that was phenomenally effective. In a couple of cases, I literally went and dropped a letter in a letterbox without a stamp to make a point that I'd been there, and told them that I was in town for a day or so, and if they wanted to, they could come and talk to me. And in a couple of cases, they did.
Wow.
And it was because what I was doing was trying to indicate I was following Tradecraft. You know, I was respecting the fact that people have no idea how easy it is to monitor using your phone.
Yeah.
That's what you've got to do to convince these people that you're serious. And it's funny because one of the things that I found was most effective was sometimes some people were so enthusiastic about speaking to me, they'd ring me on open comms. Like they'd contact me through something as wide open as Signal or WhatsApp, because it's not hard to obtain my signal. And even though those things are supposedly encrypted, I would never use those to communicate with the most sensitive sources that I try and communicate with.
Of course.
I use dead letter drops on the dark web.
Mm-hmm. Or in person.
Yeah. Or postal mail, just saying, look, I'm going to be here on this date. If you want to get hold of me, you can contact me in this way. And that's what you've got to do. You've got to operate like a spy.
You know what's actually more unsettling than most of the files we read on this channel? The fact that there are companies whose entire business is collecting your personal information and selling it. Not secret agencies, but data brokers. They gather your name and address and phone numbers, emails and relatives, and they package that information and sell it. Most people never knowingly agree to it. It just happens quietly in the background. And if you're someone who researches controversial topics, runs an online platform, or just values privacy, that is not a great feeling. And that's why I use Incogni. You see, Incogni automatically contacts data brokers on your behalf and requests that your personal information be removed from their databases. So instead of you spending hours trying to track these companies down one by one, well, Incogni handles the removal process and follows up. It is simple, and it reduces how much of you is floating around online. If you want to take control of your data, go to incogni.com/area52 and use code area52 to save 60% on an annual plan, because your privacy should not be declassified.
How are those interactions with these people? Are these people shaky? Are they paranoid? Are they looking over their shoulder constantly? How do they feel about this? And do they know you prior? Are they...
Well, it's easier now.
Right.
I mean, it's happening a lot more for
Being
me
a public
now
figure.
because I've got the News Nation role that I do.
Right.
And I think that really helps because people know me. They feel familiar with me. And I hope... I mean, I really do. I take this really seriously. There was a kind of a realization moment for me where I met somebody in a Georgetown bar in Washington who was, normally I'd see them in uniform, and the uniform they were wearing was extremely senior, and I knew them from another story that I'd done, and they were incredibly generous to me. And I remember they leaned across the table to me and said, it's real, Roscoe. And I remember I went back to my hotel that night and I thought, holy shit. Because I was guilty of starting out with a confirmational bias. I was doing what a journalist should not do.
Right.
I'd started out thinking, being a smug little smartass, I was going to disprove this UFO nonsense. I really did think it was nonsense. And the interesting thing was, the more I got into it, good people are telling me this is real. And this is the thing I wanted to emphasize. These people are patriots. What they're angry about isn't the program. They're proud of the program. They're really excited about the technologies that are being worked on and discovered. They want you, the world, the public, to know about it. And they don't think there's any really good reason that it not be revealed to the public. There's two issues. And I don't agree with the analysis that most of the detractors suggest, which is that if you reveal the first, you have to reveal the second. The first issue is there a non-human intelligence engaging with this planet? And the answer to that, indubitably, is yes. The second issue is, does the public have a right to know the details of the technology and the developments that we've advanced as a result of the recovery of that technology? Now, the argument that I get back from people, and I've spoken to people in the Pentagon and in the intelligence community, and they tell me they think if you reveal the first, you're going to have to reveal the latter. And I think that's the biggest impediment right now to any kind of government admission. They think that if they tell the public, yes, we've recovered alien spacecraft, yes, there really is non-human intelligence engaging with this planet, and we've been lying to you for the last 80 years, they think that that will lead to a catastrophic rollout of what we've got.
Sure. Yeah. And also having to explain perhaps so many other things.
Oh, and the murders and
the murders, the cover-ups,
yeah.
But also perhaps the phenomenon itself. Like, I mean, I personally, and I don't know how you feel about this, but I'm pretty certain that the phenomenon isn't a singular thing that we're dealing with. It is probably multifaceted.
Yep.
It is probably dynamic and changing, and it is we're aware of it. And there's all sorts of levels to this that we're interacting with.
Yeah.
I don't think that it's simply explained away by even words like non-human intelligence. Like, that's such a broad term. People are going to ask for specifics, and they're going to be like, what do you mean? Where are they from? And that's where it gets murky for them, because they have to go, oh, they're from here, but they're also from there, and they're from under there, and they're from, and they're from a different time, and there's all these interactions that we're potentially having.
Sure.
Which will open a can of worms. So it's not only, there's aliens, it's what are the aliens?
My issue is, I don't think there's going to be any kind of government admission about disclosure. I don't think Mark Christopher Lee is right. I'm certainly not being told by anybody I'm speaking to that there's going to be any kind of Trump announcement anytime soon. I know Trump knows, and it's public that I've spoken to his son, and I know that there is interest in the family in disclosure and seeing things coming out, but I don't think there is any intention at the moment by Donald Trump to tell the world what he's been told privately, which is that there is a non-human intelligence and that we have recovered craft and that we are doing a retrieval and reverse engineering program. I don't buy the idea that to reveal the existence of a non-human intelligence engaging with this planet inevitably leads to the forced revelation of weaponry and technology that we've developed. In the same way that when we developed the nuclear bomb, you and I don't know how to make a thermonuclear bomb, and neither should we ever. And if it's true, for example, that we've developed scalar weapons or particle beam weapons as a result of recovered technology, I don't think anyone should know that. God help us if that gets into the hands of a terrorist group or our rivals. I can understand why we'd want to keep that confidential from Russia or China, who are equally in a race to try and develop the same technology after doing their own retrievals. I'm also in no doubt about that at all. So I'm not trying to be an apologist for the national security state, but I think what they've done is they've locked themselves into a position that I think is unreasonable. And they've convinced themselves that if they reveal one, they have to reveal the other. And I don't accept that one follows the other.
I agree with that. And I also think that it is unfortunate that the bearers of this paradigm shifting secret are people with guns.
Yeah.
It's the most tragic thing that exists, because the mere idea that we are being visited or interacting with in some way this other intelligence is a great philosophical question about our humanity, and by default we default to, well, we got to hurry up and make weapons before they make weapons. Like, hold on a second. We're talking about interacting with these beautiful, potentially, things that could teach us so many things about who we are and where we're from, and we go straight to that. The conversation skipped a beat. Like, we were closer, I think, to collective disclosure in the 50s than we are now, when people were talking about space brothers and putting the nukes away and Venusians coming down. Like, I think that was probably a step in the right direction.
Sure.
Versus what we're doing now is completely just shutting down and militarizing and making everything, a national security issue.
I think one of the most galling, shocking moments for me was when people that I was talking to in the program, who are still in the program, admitted to me that we're using high pulse microwave weapons, HPMs, to
take them down
craft. And what we do is we use psionics to lure them, to bring them, to attract them, to invite them. And for some obscure reason, they keep on coming.
That's something we discussed about as well yesterday, and it's something that I've been pondering on a lot on this channel, as many of the viewers know, is that, like, that seems to me like a white blood cell response, like some type of autoimmune system response, because if they are that intelligent, they're not fish. They're not going to keep falling for the same trap and bait. Is
it like an AI?
That's what it seems to me. But okay, here's my next question. We've purposely downed these craft, right? Have we purposely murdered other beings?
Oh, God, that's a horrible thought, isn't it? Wouldn't it be an absolute catastrophe if our first contact with a non-human intelligence involved us murdering the occupants of the vehicle that we were trying to retrieve?
Have we?
I suspect we have. Yeah, I suspect we have.
That's the worst crime.
I've asked people that have been involved in retrievals, I've asked them what happened to the beings. And I just get a squeamish look. Now, I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
I don't even know if there was a being on the craft that they're talking about. They just don't want to answer the question. But it's the anguished look that they give me that concerns me most of all. And I think that's the ethical quandaries behind what we've been doing, on the rationale that what we're doing is giving ourselves a strategic advantage against our potential foreign adversaries. We've rationalized ourselves into a military groupthink that what we're doing is the right thing, when the thing I find most fascinating is even, for example, Jake Barber, who went public with me year before last. Jake talked openly about the love, the overwhelming love that he felt from whatever the intelligence was that was associated with the craft that he was recovering. It was life-changing for him, and I don't think I'm speaking out of turn if I say that for Jake, that was a defining life moment. It changed his life. He made a decision, and incredibly, he stuck to it, to speak publicly because he thinks the public has a right to know what he knows.
Yeah, that's where it gets really like murky as well. Thinking about that, for me, it breaks my heart hearing that that's a possibility. It really does. It's a very upsetting and probably the worst crime humanity could commit.
Oh, just imagine. I mean, imagine if that's true. And the thing I find most confronting is, at the moment, the official position still of the Pentagon is we have no evidence at all of extraterrestrial engagement with planet Earth.
Yeah.
And they won't say NHI engagement with planet Earth for some reason. I noticed our friend Chris Sharp has put that to Susan Gough at the Pentagon, and she won't allow him to use NHI in substitution. It means what they've done is they've very subtly confected a response that just giving them some wriggle room for when public disclosure does happen. They can say, well, no, we didn't say ET. We didn't say it was, we said it wasn't ET.
Yeah, synthetic sentience is probably the reality of the matter.
I think there's something like that gives them wriggle room.
Yeah.
The best I've got from people about the accounts of bodies that they've seen are that these are some kind of android, some kind of biological
synthetic
robot.
intelligence. Yeah.
They're constructed objects.
But that seems to be the ones we shoot down.
But also, don't forget, there's a distinction between what we've been shooting down in more recent years and what we recovered right back in the 40s and the 50s.
That's right. And what was visiting us willingly and communicating with us. And there seems to be a vast sort of spectrum of different beings interacting with us, all the way from Antonio Villas-Boas first encounter, the hills, and then going on from there, from Adamski to Dan Fry and all these other human-looking ones. In your discussions, it seems to me what I'm gathering is that a lot of the program people are more reticent in discussing the beings with you. Is that fair to say?
I think they're scared of talking about it because they're morally squeamish about making admissions about it.
I see. But have they ever confirmed to you?
I do think, just to continue the question that you asked me originally, which is what are some of the things that I've heard but I haven't been able to corroborate to my satisfaction, where I feel that I can say confidently that I think it's true.
Sure.
The other thing that I do believe is quite possibly the case, but I haven't been able to substantiate it to my satisfaction, I've only heard insufficient data points to make a conclusion, is the allegation that there are beings that have been collaborating with humans.
Right.
So the implication being that there is an ongoing collaboration between humans and non-humans in some kind of unspecified
treaty
agreement. And I keep on pointing people back to my interview with David Grush, where I pinned David down on a line in his DOPSA, in his pre-publication security review approval, where he was approved to talk about agreements. And I saw that line about agreements, and then I thought, what does that mean? And you might notice when I go and sit down with David and take him through it, he just can't go there. And it's quite clear that you're talking about agreements between America and non-human intelligences. Have we made agreements with non-human intelligences?
That's the kind of information I really hope national leadership is able to get to the bottom of.
I need to pin you down on this. Are there agreements between non-human intelligences and the American government?
I think that's a question that I would like to know all the details of as well.
And I believe there are agreements that have been made between non-humans and humans. And I do think the US government was involved, but whether it was done formally by a president or whether it was done by an agency of the United States like the CIA on behalf of the human race, imagine the ethics of that.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the thing. Imagine how Russia, Britain, China, the rest of the world will feel if they learn that the Americans concluded a deal with a non-human intelligence 60, 70 years ago.
And potentially with the wrong ones.
And potentially with the wrong ones. You've heard the same story.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's true. But because one of the things that you and I both know is that there's a lot of sprinkling of disinformation. You know, there are the Richard Doties who just love gaily spreading little droplets of falsity to try and sow discord inside the community. And the UFO community itself is a sort of a sewer of snide barbs and rasping criticism. It needs to be a more concerted and unanimous group trying to sort of fight and push for information and disclosure, but it's doing its level best to stab each other in the back. And in that context, that's what helps the intelligence community and the Defense Department to try and keep on pushing the line that there is no evidence of extraterrestrial engagement with this planet, which is not the issue.
Yeah, has there been discussions among these people, and I bring it back to the people closest to the programs, because obviously, you and I are both public figures, and I'm not, anywhere near as famous for any of this as you are, but I do receive my fair share of stories and, reports of, oh, I met this type of, alien, it had these type of arms or this type of head, or it looked like us, or, it was a small guy, it was a tall guy, all of these different things. But has there been any of that, any species talk from these people?
Obviously the Greys.
The Greys is like
it's almost the unanimous.
Almost unanimous.
Yeah.
Short Greys or tall Greys?
Short and tall.
Short and tall Greys.
It's funny. I just want to make this observation. The fact that Dr. Eric Davis, a hugely respected physicist who is making an assertion that he has been briefed by a former president, Herbert Walker Bush, about
Mantids,
Reptilians, Nordics. It's mind-blowing.
They're typically the multiple species people are familiar with, the Greys, the Nordics. People have talked about reptilians and insectoids. It's not that they're reptilian or insectoid, it's that they resemble to the recipient of reptile or an insect type.
And this is the thing that I wrestle with as a journalist, that this is on the record. I can't remember if he did it under oath or not.
It was there were members of Congress present.
Yeah. But he could be. I mean, even if it's not under oath, he could be accused of misleading Congress, or if he lied. David Grush did it under oath. At what point does the institutional legacy media go, "Ooh, there might be a story here"?
Mm-hmm.
This is the thing I just don't get, is the glacial slowness with which the legacy media is even beginning to address this issue. It should be. I mean, we're way past the probative basis for taking this seriously now. It's so obvious that there's a there.
Yeah. But
what's going on?
But
why?
How much of a there is there?
Yeah. I mean, look at, for example, what's happening with the Epstein files at the moment. Congress has developed a momentum with the Epstein files, and they would say it's because of what's been revealed in those files. And yes, what's being revealed in those files is pretty disgusting. But the interesting thing is what's been revealed in UAP testimony under oath. Deposed witnesses giving evidence to Congress. David Grush, a former very senior intelligence officer, giving evidence under oath to Congress. And I know multiple witnesses who've not yet become known to the public, to the media, who've given evidence to the Senate Intelligence Committee, the Senate Armed Services Committee, the HASC.
First-hand witnesses.
The Oversight. There's been a lot more witnesses who've given evidence that have been publicly disclosed. And I'm perplexed as to why these committees haven't developed more fangs to go and chase down the information that they've been given. David Grush has given them the times, dates, places, locations, names, literally the door numbers. Go and open this door and have a look.
Is that disheartening to him?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure it is.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not speaking out of turn. I'm sure he's finding it as frustrating as we all are. And I think the simple problem is that what's happened is there's been an incredible power play behind the scenes where certain key senators in particular, majority leaders, have been taken aside and discreetly spoken to. And they're just given enough privileged information because information is currency.
How many syllables in his name?
But what that's done is it's shut down Congress momentum. And so we were going really well towards the end of last year. It was looking like we were going to get disclosure laws, new disclosure laws that were absolutely essential. I mean, there are contractors I'm talking to, people who are not Defense Department employees or intelligence community employees, and people don't understand this. They don't get the protections, the whistleblower protections that exist under the current laws. one of, in my view, the most important parts of this new legislation was to extend those protections to contractors and make sure that contractors were given the same protection. So if you're somebody working for, let's say, Northrop Grumman, did I say Northrop Grumman? Lockheed Martin, if you want some of those people to come forward, you need to give them protections, because they have to feel that they will be legally protected, that they're not going to be punished, and that there will be a sanction against any institution that tries to punish them for speaking publicly.
I feel like I'm kind of reading between the lines here, but, Jake Barber, is there a reason why he stopped sort of his initial push? He had this momentum after your interview, and it made quite a splash, and it placed a lot of things, and Northrop Grumman came up quite a lot in the following discussions after that, and this range and this, these things happening over there. Do you know the reason why Jake has sort of opted out of, his initial?
You say he's opted out.
Well, publicly, at least, it feels that way.
I don't think he's opted out at all. I think he's done all he can do within the law.
Within the law, I see.
So for somebody like him, he's, at our instigation, we said to him, would you testify? Would you be willing to testify to the Congress? And he said, yeah, sure. So we filmed him going to the Congress and giving of his evidence. He gave them chapter and verse on what he knows. They know who he's talking about. And he's described to them the details of, for example, the blue on blue incident that's been talked about. He's talked about the incident where he believes he and his team, a special operations team, was set up. They believed that they were the subject of an attempt by a private corporation to murder them. Doesn't get much more serious than that.
It doesn't.
And if you're Jake Barber, there becomes a point where it frankly doesn't make a lot of sense. Why would you?
Yeah.
Why stick your head up?
Yeah, you've done quite a bit.
If Congress isn't going to show the spine to follow this up, the will, it's pretty easy to get an impression of what's really going on in Congress. And if you get the impression that political leaders are just treading water, they're not taking this seriously, they're just humoring the media. I mean, there are good people in Congress. We all know them. A lot of the key members of the UFO UAP caucus, they're doing the right thing, pushing for disclosure, but they're not powerful people in the Congress. It's the gatekeepers in the Congress, the opinion leaders, the people who control the numbers, who have to be swayed. And at the moment, they've made a calculated decision based on, I think, a lot of lobbying from the defense and intelligence community to quietly sit down and quietly go quiet.
Do you believe that some of the people you've spoken to, Jake included, David Grush included, are closer to the program than they let on?
I can't say.
Well, I think you just did.
Yeah, I can't say.
Okay.
I mean, what I can tell you is I became aware of David Grush from people in the program. They said to me, you need to find out about this guy.
I see.
He's asking good questions. He seems really well motivated.
That this public-facing cover might be not as, might be just some type of like surface cover to allow them to give out some information, but that in reality they might be a little bit deeper into the program?
I don't buy the line that Jake or David are part of a controlled disclosure.
No, that's not what I'm asking. I'm just asking if what they've disclosed, they might know a lot more than they're letting.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, I'm in no doubt about that.
And might be involved a lot more.
No, and I think particularly David. I mean, David, frankly, was cleared unbelievable. I mean, I'm privy to information from sources unrelated to David. When I was checking David out.
That had mentioned him?
There were people who were in awe of David Grush.
Wow.
I mean, literally, David was carrying the presidential daily brief and secret documents to the White House on a train with a colleague escorting him. I mean, that's how trusted he was. He had knowledge of, I think, over 2,000 special access programs, right up to WUSAPs. He was one of the most highly cleared people in the Defense Department for secrets. So he's privy to a lot of programs. And the really interesting thing is, when you look at how he came to the realization, working with the UAP task force, that there was this parallel program that had been kept secret from him, it blew him away. He had not the conceit, but, he had the strong belief that he'd know about it. Of course he'd know about it. I'm cleared for all of these secrets. Why don't I know about this? And then when he asked friends of his, literally in the cafeteria at the Pentagon, what do you know about this claim about a legacy program involving UFOs? And people sort of gave him a bit of a nudge. And then he realized it was real. And that's the interesting thing is, I was going to tell you earlier, one of the people that I've met in the course of my investigations is a former very senior official at NASA. And they are an absolute luminary of the defense establishment, somebody who you would automatically think would have been read in to the program because of the roles that they played at the level that they played in the Defense Department. This is somebody who worked at an extremely high level in NASA and also went and worked at an extremely high senior executive level in the Defense Department. And miraculously, they agreed to speak to me. And they said, look, Ross, if this is true, I promise you, I do not know anything about this. And I became aware of the fact that the person 3 rungs down from him in NASA was the gatekeeper for the legacy program. And this was a person who was in charge. I just recently found this out. This was a person who was in charge of a lunar reconnaissance mission that's incredibly significant in terms of anomalies on the moon. And what freaked me out was the realization that this is so controlled and so clever that you can have the person who's almost at the apex of the entity completely oblivious and unaware of the fact that there is this secret program that's, I believe very strongly, hiding from the public knowledge of things that NASA has seen over the years and obscuring photographs and hiding data. I know. How
many people do you think are involved in something like that? Like, okay, at the tip, I've heard numbers anywhere up to like 24, or like this is, at the very tip. But just beneath that, like what would have to be? I mean, thousands, right?
There would have to be thousands now who are read in. I mean,
that's an inconceivable number for people to think about. But obviously, if we go back to Manhattan Project, there was 130,000 people involved.
For the people who say that it couldn't possibly be kept secret, the Manhattan Project is a perfect example.
Yeah.
Were it not for Klaus Fuchs, who was the Russian spy who penetrated the Manhattan Project, it might have stayed secret for a lot longer from the Soviets. But the simple fact is, one traitor can blow this. And I can tell you the level of surveillance in the legacy program is just insane.
How do you know that?
Because of the measures that my sources require me to go to, the techniques that I have to use in order to communicate with them.
Have you ever caught them sort of listening in on you? Have you ever had an instance where you're like, oh, I see you there, and they kind of run off, or like?
No. I mean, these people are patriots.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing that I feel an enormous sense of responsibility about is these are good people.
They want to serve their country.
They want to serve their country, and they're proud of what they're doing.
Of course, as the people who worked on the atomic bomb were proud, and they were also heroes.
Yeah, and what they feel is that this is a program where the reason for the secrecy, they think, has subsumed everything else. It's like it doesn't really matter anymore what the reason is. The secrecy is paramount.
Right.
And it's insane because it's got to the point where the rationale seems to be, and this is my perception, I'm not saying that this is necessarily the reality, but my perception is, my takeaway is, there is no good bloody reason why this can't be revealed anymore.
Or none that's apparent to you.
They've just locked themselves into a secrecy. It's easier to lie and keep it secret.
Unless, unless the secret requires them to divulge not only criminal activity, but more so things that will unwind the fabric of our reality.
I think I was the first to suggest this. I was privy as a journalist to covering the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And I don't think, a lot of people get angry with me when I say this because they want public trials and they want people prosecuted for murder and all this sort of stuff. And maybe they should be. But one of the most effective things I've ever seen to stop a nation state from tearing itself apart was what I saw in post-apartheid South Africa, where de Klerk, the president at the time, ordered a Truth and Reconciliation Commission and handed a power over to Nelson Mandela. And Nelson Mandela was brought in as president. And I watched a boss Secret Service agent, a former guy who'd been involved in killing members of SWAPO, the anti-apartheid group, what they categorized as a terrorist organization. I watched an incredible moment where the family of the man who'd been killed by this guy, beaten to death in prison, listened as this guy talked about what he'd done, the crimes that he'd committed. And he knew that if he gave a full and candid confession of what he'd done, he was exonerated. There's nothing the state could do to him. And I strongly believe that was far more healing, and that's certainly what the family told me of the man who was killed, than putting the guy in prison for 20 or 30 years.
And letting him hold on to all that.
Yeah.
And not
because
divulge it.
For that man, I mean, the fascinating thing for me as a journalist was seeing that killer. And it was killers on both sides. I mean, in that conflict, you had black killing white, white killing black. It was a really nasty internecine conflict. But it was curative. It was a restorative thing for that country.
But I suppose the difference here is that these people aren't operating under government, oversight. And that's the problem, is that we can offer them this immunity, but they're going to get a bullet to the back of the head.
Yeah. Well, I mean, some of them have.
Yeah, and some of them have, yeah.
I mean, this is the incredible thing about this, and this is what really angers me, because Congress has dropped the ball. And this is who we should be angry with. At the moment, we can see with the congressional response to the Epstein story, I don't think the current administration is going to get away with trying to bury the Epstein story. It's pretty obvious that there are now Republicans who are saying, we cannot tolerate this. These are little girls that have been raped by ugly establishment men. Mm-hmm. This needs to be revealed. I think it's going to be fascinating over the next few months to see the impetus building, because it's very like the impetus that built the public outrage that sparked the Church Commission into the CIA's abuses in the 1970s. What I'm wondering is whether we can get momentum for the UAP issue out of that as well, as part of a broader investigation into not just VIP elites having sex with little girls on an island owned by Jeffrey Epstein, but the whole idea of a deep state, which I never used to believe in. I used to think that was paranoid right-wing nonsense. The whole idea that there's a
But wouldn't that also be a great misdirection?
What, investigating the Epstein material?
No, I mean, not in the sense that it shouldn't be investigated, but in the sense that maybe there is, in light of recent age of disclosure coming out, there's been a little bit more public interest in this stuff. I don't know if
it is a misdirection. You see, I think what lies at the heart of all of this is there's something broken in the America that I grew up, I can honestly tell you as a boy, revering. Mm-hmm. We looked in Australia and New Zealand when I was a kid with awe at America as the leader of the free world. A country that lived democratic ideals and principles. And in law school, we studied the US Constitution, and it enshrined these rights. And we studied the story of how these rights had been won, and the founding forefathers dictated these rights and put them down in a constitutional document, a Bill of Rights. You're so lucky. The Americans are so lucky they've got that document. But what's happened is those ideals have been squandered. I mean, they're there in name only, in expression of ideal only. They're not really being practiced. And we see the frustration, the public frustration with what's happening with the Epstein story, the fact that there really is a group of people who are being protected, frankly, by people in power. The government is misusing its authority, its legal power, to stop further investigation into people who quite properly ought to be held to account. And there's really, I don't think, a huge difference between the potential illegality, impropriety, and I think constitutional issues that are raised by that, especially when politicians are involved and potential administration figures, and the kind of issues that are being raised by the UAP subject. What we've got here at the heart of our issues is a constitutional crisis. Does America care anymore about democracy? 50 years ago, a newspaper, the Washington Post, pretty much single-handedly propelled public awareness about alleged crimes committed by people close to the president. You know, the extraordinary revelations of Watergate.
The Watergate scandal, yeah.
And the involvement of a president in a cover-up, ordering break-ins into psychiatrists' offices in the Watergate complex to get dirt on the Democrats. Incredible scandal. And it led to reforms that instigated oversight protections in the Constitution and in the Congress that were a warning to the public, don't let this happen again. And the amazing thing is, we have, because all through that time, the one secret that they sat on, that they protected, was the UFO secret, the UAP secret. And if, and I believe it is, it's true that people have been murdered to protect these secrets, intimidated, bullied, threatened, their lives destroyed, you know, people basically beaten, hurt, their jobs taken away from them, their security clearances stripped for no good reason. If that kind of state intimidation and misuse of lethal force has been used to exert a control over this secret, why isn't that just as important, if not more important, than the fact that there's no momentum on the Epstein case?
Oh, there's no question that it is important, and there's no question that there, you know, I think a lot of people feel this way, even if they are quite passive about it. The problem is that that's kind of always existed.
Yes, but that's
this
what
thuggery from the government.
That's what I would call the resigned skeptic view of the world, which is, these mongrels, they're always going to lie to us. They're always going to be deceitful. They're always going to. And look, you know, I love the histories of the CIA that show that the real history of the CIA is just about
it's skullduggery.
You know, the levels of illegality and lies. I mean, the fact that Alan Dulles and James Jesus Angleton did what I think were totally illegal things when they were running the CIA and misled presidents, withheld information from elected authorities, that enshrined an attitude in the CIA,
right,
which led John F. Kennedy to decide he wanted to blow the organization into 1,000 pieces.
Yeah,
he was really angry about it. And I don't believe President Kennedy was killed by a lone assassin. I think there was a conspiracy, and the evidence is overwhelming of that. And you get these pompous asses in the usual establishment newspapers who sweepingly assert in the op-ed articles that they write every year or so, you know, these conspiracy theorists who basically speculate that there was some kind of a plot by the CIA. It wasn't a plot by the CIA. It was a plot by individuals within and without the CIA, Cuban emigres, Alan Dulles. I'm in no doubt that is integrally connected to the UAP subject.
Of course. He also wanted nukes to be gone.
Yeah.
You know, and that was a big problem as well, because you had these, you know, generals who were like nuke happy and
yeah. And I just noticed today I was reading the latest article by Jeff Cruikshank, my Australian friend, who believes that the MJ12 documents are almost certainly real.
Which the Psalm 1. Yeah.
Yeah, and basically what he's looked at in his most recent analysis is handwriting of President Truman with handwriting of Truman allegedly in the MJ-12 documents, and it's clearly identical.
The sort of Eisenhower briefing.
But more importantly, it refers to things that weren't known about at the time that the MJ-12 documents appeared, that were only released, I think, in 2023.
Wow.
And so
it's interesting.
It's really interesting. So we're in a situation now where increasingly the provenance of the so-called MJ-12 documents, which suggest a government conspiracy, a cabal of people that are trying to protect the secrets of the UFO mystery for the benefit of a certain group of people in the United States, the fact that even if that's being done as a kind of noble cause, process corruption in the interests of the state, by a few people who are doing it to protect maybe an executive order that was signed right back in 1947 or in the 1950s. It just doesn't wash in this day and age that you could have a situation where Clinton or Obama, Ford or Carter weren't able to be briefed on that information, and they were making decisions as the person nominally in charge of the defense forces of America, nominally the commander-in-chief, not knowing that the president didn't have a right to know, and they were making integral decisions about the deployment of strategic resources of the military and the intelligence community. There's just something broken,
of course,
in a state that allows that kind of thing to happen.
There definitely is. But how do you break the news that you have a treaty with aliens to the population? You know what I mean? 'Cause where's that line of like, what do we tell them? How do we?
Well, if anybody's going to do it, I think it's Trump that's got the balls to do it.
Right.
I don't think any other president would have the cojones or the impetuousness to decide to do it. I think Trump might just. But I don't want to disappoint people, but I'm hearing no evidence from anyone. None of my sources are telling me.
His daughter went on the record recently.
His daughter-in-law.
Daughter-in-law, sorry, my bad.
Lara.
Went on the record recently saying, no, he's got something up his sleeve type deal.
Well, she's hearing stories. Yeah. And look, I don't know. I mean, bottom line is, I would have thought that some of my sources would have heard about it by now if there was a speech being prepared. And at the moment, I'm not hearing any suggestion that there is.
Okay. Let's shift gears here a bit. I want to talk. Thank you for that lovely train of thought on the corruption of the United States agencies, and I think we all kind of feel the same way. We're all. Distrust is growing. It's not dissipating.
And this is the thing, is that it's so corrosive.
Yeah.
It really is corrosive. And I think that's why this issue is capturing the public imagination the way it is. So I don't know about you, but I am just overwhelmed by people wanting to engage and talk about the UAP issue.
Yeah, everyone except flat earthers are really happy about their conspiracies coming true. I think the flat earthers are the ones left in the dark. They're like, wait, literally, you're admitting to everything? We got UFOs. We got this cabal of like children eating, politicians. And
I'm sorry, there are some of these wilder claims that I just can't take seriously.
Yeah. Have you? Okay, I want to talk about the beings a little bit more, because this is something that I'm really interested in a philosophical way, but also just I think it's really interesting. We hear a lot of these tales and stories. Has anyone ever come to you in any credible sort of fashion with the information of reptilian beings being among us, or being interacting with us, or us having encountered them? Has any of... and
Look, it depends what you call credible.
Sure.
I'm at a really interesting point in my own research where I wrestle with the fact that, as a journalist, a lot of people say, it's only a witness. That's not evidence.
Right.
And witness evidence is evidence.
Of course it is.
It's the best evidence.
Mm-hmm.
And what we do in court is we test that evidence by cross-examination. And we hold that witness to their evidence and try and find holes in it. So I talk all the time to people who are first-hand witnesses who say they've had experiences with beings.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest with you, probably up until 5 years ago, I used to giggle at them. I used to think it was
At the reptilian being specifically, or
any of this.
any beings.
You know, I used to. I mean, I said to Whitley Strieber when I interviewed him last year, I said, you know, Whitley, I would have laughed you out of town.
Yeah.
5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the idea of, you know, aliens coming into your bedroom at night,
Sure.
and taking your semen, or you know, taking you onto a spaceship. I mean, it's so easily ridiculed and stigmatized. But what I'm wrestling with at the moment is, like John Mack did, the abduction phenomenon, or let's call it more neutrally, the experiencer phenomenon, where people claim to have moments where they have been taken somewhere.
Yeah.
Sometimes it seems to be voluntary.
Yeah, it's some physical, non-physical.
And they're having encounters with beings. And so sometimes they're reptilian. For me, the big one in recent years was I had several individuals contacted me completely independently, telling me how I'd started talking about downloads. And I'm really fascinated with consciousness, and I'm sure we'll get onto consciousness, but I'm fascinated with the idea that the real mystery, I don't really care anymore about the nuts and bolts claim of craft aliens. It's kind of like tangential. To me, the real mystery is consciousness.
Sure.
And what's going on with human minds, and what's the meaning of our relationship in all of this. Why, if there are beings that are engaging with this planet, why are they interested in us, us humans, or at least some humans? And I keep on coming back to this consciousness mystery, and a lot of people have been telling me about what they get are downloads. In some cases, in many cases, it's either creative downloads. They're inspired to write beautiful art, or to do beautiful art, or write beautiful music, or scientific ideas. Literally, schematics, diagrams come into their heads and they write them down. And I've had this described to me by multiple people, multiple occasions. And in a period of time, about 18 months, 2 years ago, a lot of people started responding to me when I just casually mentioned the blue guys.
Yeah.
And I just said it casually. I just said, oh, you mean the blue guys? And I said it almost as a flippant comment. Oh my God, I was just swamped. My inbox just completely filled up all over the world. People were writing to me about their engagement with the blue guys. And one example, there was a guy contacted me from a European country, and he had a dream, semi-dream, in that liminal moment between dreaming and waking, where there's a blue being talking to him. And then he's sitting in his living room and he's seeing what look like hieroglyphic images, and he's photographing them. And he sent me pictures of these images, and I sent them to somebody I know who's associated with the National Security Agency, the NSA. And he said it was like Sumerian.
Oh, wow.
And like ancient Sumerian symbology. And he couldn't translate a lot of it. A lot of it didn't make sense. But what was fascinating to me is the idea that there seems to be something engaging with human consciousness, or at least the consciousness of some humans, trying to communicate, in a lot of cases downloading. And talking about beings, a lot of them were these supposedly benevolent blue beings, often humanoid, but taller. And
not unlike what Jason Sands even describes being physical.
Yeah. And it's interesting because that was the one where I was completely overwhelmed. I mean,
you go from zero.
I went from zero to like hundreds.
Yeah.
And I was kind of embarrassed because a lot of them contacted me hoping that I would put them on camera and interview them. And it's like, do I? You know, and then I'm wrestling with this as a journalist.
Sure.
At what point do I start giving credibility to the idea that there are people giving consistent witness statements of what appear to be first-hand encounters with a phenomenon that appears to be a non-human intelligence that is engaging with them often in a semi-dream state?
Yeah.
But which appears to them to be real.
Yeah, there is the question, and that's something John Mack wrestled with as well, was the majority, what seems to be the majority of these interactions with these beings seems to be non-physical.
Yeah.
And that doesn't necessarily mean a dream. There is some type of in-between non-physical realm that isn't quite a dream, and that can even leave you with physical markings. Like there is like
Sure.
this overlap as well. So it begins to get very complicated when you try to explain the physical side, and people have a hard time swallowing that. And then to go from that to be like, oh, but the non-physical is also real.
Yeah.
And you go, wait a second. No, non-physical doesn't mean real in my brain. Non-physical means not real. But doesn't seem to be the case when the information that you're pulling from this non-physical can translate into something very real.
Yeah. And this is my problem with a lot of the phenomenon. And Jacques Vallée's talked about this, that whatever it is, we know from what's called Slide 9, which I wrote about in my book, this briefing document that was prepared for an Undersecretary of Defence, which essentially was the UAP task force or ORSAP briefing the Defence Department about what they'd learned about the phenomenon. And one of the things that they were telling the Defence Department was that whatever it is, it has the capacity to manipulate human perception.
Yeah.
I think they use something like cognitive inputs or something
Sure.
like that. But essentially, when you read between the lines, what they're describing is the ability to alter human perception.
Yep.
And I told you the story yesterday, and I'll tell you publicly in a limited way. I spoke to a very senior Australian politician who contacted me out of the blue. He'd seen a story that I'd done on Australian TV. And this was a person, I was shocked that they rang me. They'd had to get my phone number off somebody and pull a favor. And I was like, holy hell, I cannot believe this person had rung me. And he said, Ross, I would deny I had this conversation if you ever named me, but I want you to know what happened to me. And he was a very senior minister of the Australian government, so secretary plus level, in the administration. And he is standing on a set of steps in Sydney, Australia, looking out over a public area where there are cars moving around, and he's waiting for his ministerial limousine to come and pick him up. His press secretary is standing beside him, and there are bodyguards standing around him as well, which probably gives you an idea of how important he was. And he looks up and he sees what he described to me, and he's adamant it was real. He says, I wasn't hallucinating, I hadn't been drinking, I hadn't been out for lunch. He looks up and he sees a gigantic elliptical metal disc hovering over the square. And he's looking at his press secretary, who's looking up perplexed as well, and he can see that he's looking at something, but he can't see what he's seeing. And he realizes whatever it is, it's definitely real to him. It's projecting to him that it's there. But as he said to me, he said, I can't say for sure that it was there, but it wanted me to know that it was real. And he said, why would it do that? And I'm at a disadvantage in the sense that to protect this person, I can't reveal the role that they were playing. But suffice to say, it was a very senior role. And it's interesting that somebody in a very senior political leadership position was being
shown,
projected to. Their perception was being manipulated in some way by what appears to have been a non-human intelligence representing itself to them in a way that could not be perceived by other people. And so that's why I'm often wary of even saying that when we see craft,
sure,
or even beings, I wonder whether there's a phenomenology that's capable of presenting itself in whatever way. And I think sometimes you and I were talking yesterday about mantids. I'm talking to people who say that they have been visited by mantid beings. And I'll freely admit, 5-6 years ago, I would have laughed them out of town and gone, they're completely crazy people. These people, whether what they're seeing is real or not, I believe that they have had what they perceived as mantid beings in their home. And there is not a trace of guile in the way that they are telling me this story. And what's interesting is those mantid beings are telling them to engage with me. And it's getting quite personal because this is happening quite a lot to me. And I don't think I'm important. I'm just a journalist. I really, truly believe all I'm doing is following an absolute ball terror of a story. And frankly, it suits me that the rest of the media don't chase this up because at the moment, very few people are running around chasing it.
Yeah, you're on the ground floor.
It's just a mind-blowing story. But what intrigues me is you can't rule out the possibility that what this all is the one phenomenon representing itself
manipulating
in different
perception.
ways.
That, and when you say that, I immediately think back to Jake Barber's incident with this 8 gone craft, and he gets overwhelmed with this sense of love. What's to stop them from, imbuing us with those senses as well? Like
Sure.
there are tales from people like Dan Burish, and take that for what it's worth. But he would also say that these beings would, when looking into their eyes, flood you with your own endorphins and give you a sense of calm and peace and almost euphoria.
Sure.
And because of that, you felt this sense of familiarity. You felt the sense of like, oh, I know these people. Oh, they're good. And they would essentially, he said that it was the rogue entities, the ones that took you at night, that did that to you.
But the really interesting thing about that is if they can do that, a lot of people automatically default to the idea that, like, these are loving beings.
That's right. That's what I'm saying.
They're all benevolent.
It might be a psyop.
It could be that they're just manipulating us.
Mm.
And
I've had that thought a lot.
And it's interesting. I get very frustrated with people who decry the people who say that there's a threat here.
Right.
Because if you're a military person or an intelligence, counterintelligence person, by definition, what we're talking about here is a threat.
Sure.
Because we don't understand it. And it's not that it's evil or malevolent, but it's capable of being evil or malevolent.
Yeah.
And it's got the capabilities, if it's got the capabilities to manipulate our perception, think about the implications of that.
Yeah.
If it can make people feel differently. Imagine if a world leader could be manipulated to feel differently about a decision.
Yeah, the difference is that I'm very resigned to the idea that I'm not the apex here.
No, I certainly know we're not.
And I think a lot of people in power struggle with that, and that's probably the reason for wanting to, defense up and try to, I don't know, defeat these things, or at least have the capability to defend yourself against these things when it's crystal clear that if they wanted to, we wouldn't be here, or we wouldn't be allowed to be here, and there would be some other, I
mean, if you look at, for example, what our friend Patrick Jackson has talked about, this kind of sphere. I don't think Patrick's got the whole story right.
Yeah.
But I do think that, and a lot of people are telling me internally that a lot of what Patrick is talking about is actually hitting the right
there's
mark.
an AI system defending this planet.
And maybe there are malevolent beings.
Sure.
I mean, certainly Coulthart, Brazil, describes phenomena where people were killed. They were mutilated.
Yeah.
Their genitals were cut off in some cases.
Blood loss.
Yeah, it was shocking. The cattle mutilation stuff, that doesn't seem very friendly. It's not very nice to go around murdering cattle. I mean,
human mutilations too.
Human mutilations. And frankly, there's a lady I'm talking to, she's in her late 80s, and I find her account compelling because she actually went to a doctor and discovered that she'd been pregnant, but she had no memory of ever being pregnant, but her body had the classic signs of somebody who'd carried a baby. And yet there was no evidence of that anymore. Where was the baby? And she tells me this incredible story about how she's been in touch with what she says are benevolent beings that have shown her what's planned for the fetus that they took from her body. And what do I do with that? I mean, how do we even begin to assess the credibility of a witness like that? Do we discount them out of turn? Do we, after 5 or 6 people have told me the same thing, start giving it, like John Mack did, a degree of credibility? That's where I'm sort of wrestling with at the moment with the abduction phenomenon, because I've started going very gently down that rabbit hole. And I freely admit, as a journalist, I'm a bit scared of it because there are so many people who are, with no disrespect to them, mentally ill, who are drawn to this subject matter, who make dramatic claims. And, a lot of the time I can pick them because they write in capitals or they put 20 stamps on the letter when they post it to me. There's signs of mental instability. But a lot of these people are highly credible, intelligent, professional people who just happen to have an experience that they can't explain, that involves them very strongly believing that they've been in touch with a non-human intelligence.
Yeah, I think it's important to tell those stories, from my opinion.
Sure.
And it's easy for me to say, as someone who, for the most part, provides entertainment in this space and doesn't necessarily provide like a rigorous journalistic approach to this as much as you do. And you have this credibility to uphold that you've created, throughout your entire life. And that is much. You've got to be much more careful than I do with this stuff. But I think that there is a value and an importance to let people who are obviously mentally stable to tell their story without this idea of, is it credible, is it not credible? And just give them a safe, comfortable space to tell that story so that they don't leave anything out. Because a lot of times what happens with witnesses, as I'm sure you know, they'll tell you a story, but they're withholding the craziest part of the story. They're keeping to themselves the most wild, unexplainable part of the phenomenon for fear of just that, for fear of being ridiculed.
Sure.
And so they'll tell you the Cliff Notes version, as I was taken aboard a craft, or hey, I saw this UFO in the field and it was this big, and they'll tell you how fast the wind was blowing and what time of day and what direction it was going. And then you dig a little deeper and they go, yeah, well, 2 nights before that, I came home and all the cupboard doors were open in my house, but they won't tell you that.
It's funny, a few months ago I interviewed Larry Warren, who's a very controversial witness to the Rendlesham RAF Bentwaters case, a UK sighting where a craft allegedly landed in a forest in Suffolk, England, at the location of a very sensitive nuclear-armed American Air Force base during the Cold War. And I did what I do as a journalist. I'd read about Larry Warren and I thought, I'm going to bring him on, but I have to put to him. And I'd warned him in advance. I'd said, Larry, I've got to ask you some difficult questions because there are inconsistencies in what you've said previously. You've contradicted yourself. Some things don't quite make sense. You're contradicted by other people. They say you made this up. And it was funny because I actually felt I'd been quite even-handed with Larry, and that I led him to the conclusion because he was very much at cross odds with Colonel Charles Holt, who I do believe impeccably. Charles Holt was a colonel, deputy commander of the base, and he spoke out publicly that he had seen a craft of some kind moving through the trees, and he was angry with Larry Warren because he believed that Larry had confabulated, that he'd made up a whole story about a separate event where he'd seen the craft on the ground and British policemen taking photographs and a whole series of events that Charles Holt said didn't happen. And in the course of the interview, I did what I'd done my analysis on. It occurred to me that Charles Holt was talking about one incident in the forest, and he didn't know that Larry had gone later that evening to another location where there was an open field where another event occurred where a whole lot of people described an event that took place that involved allegedly beings coming out of the craft and some kind of film being taken by the US military on the scene, a whole elaborate cover-up. And there were problems because Larry had a memory that Colonel Holt was there. And to me, I'm trained to analyze plausible explanations out of conflicting facts. It struck me as obvious that what had happened, if there was a plausible prosaic explanation for this as a real event, it struck me as obvious that potentially what had happened was Larry had mistaken the earlier part of the evening where Charles Holt was in the earlier incident, where he was with him in the forest, and he'd placed him at this later incident, and that's why Charles and he were at odds. I felt I'd done a reasonable explanation to sort of try and find a way to make the two witness statements compatible. And oh my God, there's one particular person, I won't name them here, but they sent me the most abusive message saying I was a shame to journalism because I'd attacked Larry Warren. And I actually think I had quite a civil conversation with Larry. And for me, it was good to see Larry exposing himself to cross-examination.
Yes.
And I think adjudicating himself well.
Yeah.
And what I don't like is there is a view among some in the experiencer community, people who purport to have had experiences with the phenomenon, where you almost have to have an article of religious faith. You must believe me, otherwise you're a complete bastard and I'm never going to speak to you again. And the people I look for are the people who are prepared to be, in some cases, aggressively cross-examined.
Yes.
Because I think what the public want is they want those inconsistencies to be raised. I mean, I envy you and Jeremy Corbell and George because you've been able to talk directly to Bob Lazar. I've approached Bob Lazar a couple of times, and I have a very forensic way of interviewing. And it's been obvious to me that Bob doesn't want to speak to me. And I think potentially that's because he knows that I'd be giving him a bit of a blowtorch about things that are allegedly inconsistent. But what I do, people often think that's me just being a smart aleck, trying to attack people for no good reason. What I'm trying to do
is give him the opportunity.
To explain and show an explanation for those inconsistencies.
What's an inconsistency about Bob?
For example,
the MIT stuff comes up a lot.
People criticize his academic record and say that he doesn't have 2 master's degrees from MIT and Caltech. I mean, I'll say this. I know Bob Lazar almost certainly did work at Area 51, which of course is officially denied. Mm-hmm. I believe he did. And I strongly know that S4 is real because I spoke to Dave Fruhoff before he died, who was essentially one of the people running logistics at Area 51, who confirmed to me that he'd heard about the existence of S4. He'd never been there, but he'd also spoken to multiple people who had seen Bob Lazar at Area 51, not when he was there. So it was kind of weakish evidence, but to me it was quite persuasive evidence that Bob was potentially telling the truth.
But what's another thing that you would like to get answers on if you had the opportunity to ask Bob?
Look, one of the things that's used to discredit him is the allegation that he ran a brothel.
Sure.
And so what if he did?
That's what I'm saying too.
Yeah.
It doesn't bother me in the slightest. Has nothing to do.
Last time I checked, brothels were legal in Nevada, aren't they?
I would also say that they were hiring a lot of wild people back then.
Sure. The other one is Moscovium element 115.
Sure.
The scientists say that it's in his isotopic ratios that he describes. It can't possibly survive to be useful as an energy source in the way that he describes. Mm-hmm. And I'm not a scientist, I'm not a physicist, but I would love to put that to him and hear that. And no disrespect to you or to anybody else that's interviewed him in the past, I think what the public want to see is, and this is what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to bring the rigor of somebody who's trained in investigative journalism to questioning the people who have become some of the stalwarts of UAPology. And the thing that fascinates me is when I do get that opportunity, I mean, I've recently interviewed people, for example, I've brought multiple witnesses that have been involved in sightings of craft on what are clearly US military ranges, where there's an obvious awareness by the military that these craft are there, and it does appear that there is a collusion between whatever's operating that craft and the military to the extent that they know about each other and they're not surprised by it, and their first instinct is to try and cover it up. And I've found the way that the witnesses respond when I cross-examine them and treat it like I would in a court case where I'm trying to find a reason to be skeptical. There's a lot of people in ufology who say, you shouldn't do that. You're attacking that person.
No.
And I don't agree. I think it's a difficult thing because I always try and treat people with respect, even if I think they are charlatans. But the best cross-examination in a court case is where, in a methodical way, the layers of truth are opened, and blind Freddy can see whether somebody's telling the truth or lying. And that's the thing I find most fascinating about the UAP subject, is that not a lot of that has happened. There's a tendency to credulously accept. I mean, for example, on Travis Walton, for example, I mean, I've not spoken or interviewed to Travis directly on camera yet, but I'd love to do an interview with Travis where I go through what I perceive from my reading are sometimes inconsistencies and questions that get raised by me about those cases. And it's difficult because I think there's a tendency, one of the things I'm really uncomfortable about is you go to UFO conferences and some of these people are treated like heroes.
Yes.
And they are.
Celebrities, royalty.
They're brave because they're speaking out. But at the same time,
but they're held on a pedestal that people aren't comfortable questioning.
I don't think we should be credulous.
Yeah, sure.
I think we should be seen to be questioning and just saying, but listen, hey, listen, no disrespect here. Don't get angry, but can you explain this? You said this here, and then you said this here. That sounds different. Can you explain that?
Yeah.
And there's been a number of occasions where I've actually had people get really angry with me saying, how dare you do that? You know, you're questioning their credibility. And in fact, I don't believe I am at all. What I'm doing is giving them the opportunity to clarify those two things.
and to enforce that credibility.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that's probably the right take, and it's something that I'm aware of as well. When talking to people, I try to, as much as I can read the situation, to do that without affecting the energy that we're creating in order to keep this a safe and vulnerable space for them to go into deep detail about.
If somebody arcs up, if I start asking somebody questions and they arc up and go, look, how dare you ask me these questions? I didn't come on here to be cross-examined. I'm going to ask them to leave.
Sure.
Because it's pointless.
Yeah.
I mean, to some degree, people have to be probed.
Sure.
And, if they're not willing to do that, then it makes me question what their motives are.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's something that there is a line that I'm discovering as I'm learning all this stuff, and I'm a student of interviewing people. I've been only been doing this for a few years, but it's something that I've learned is quite a skill to do with people, is toe that line of, I want you to be as open as you want to be and as you've ever been. But I also want to make sure that we're covering the important things that you've claimed, but I don't want to be disrespectful. And there is a line there that has to be danced upon. And I feel like maybe you've had so many conversations where you've gotten to the point where you're really good at it, but you also now are slightly. It feels like you're kind of over that, and you're like, you know what, let's just cut the shit and let's just get to the core, and then after that we can chit chat and have a good time. And I'm learning from this. I'm watching and I'm learning. But,
the thing I'm finding more and more is there are a lot of people in the UAP community of people who watch the stuff I do, and they treat it too much like entertainment.
Yeah.
This shouldn't. I mean, it's entertaining. I find it fascinating, but at the same time, the entertainment shouldn't be the main driver. What this is all about is an opportunity to try and ascertain objective truth. And it's why, even though at times I find him annoying because he's becoming more of a debunker than he is a skeptic, people like Mick West are actually very useful and positive because they keep us on our toes.
Sure.
I think he raises legitimate points from time to time. And I think on occasion he's been right.
Absolutely.
I mean, I had a guy from France email me yesterday, and he sent me an image of an object moving super, super fast across the sky. And within about 5 seconds, I could see that what it was an insect, and he'd focused with his autofocus on the insect. Classic parallax, moving across front of frame, very close to the lens. And he'd measured the speed at something like 4,000 miles an hour, and he was thinking, this is an amazing UFO video. And I was really polite. I just went back to him and I said, look, I'm really sorry. This looks like this. It looks like this is an insect, and it's almost certainly that because you're focusing on animals in the distance, and it's a beautiful picture, and I can see exactly what's happened here. Unless there's independent evidence, for example, if you've got a witness that actually saw the object at a distance, I can't make any assessment of this as being anything other than an object that's moving close to the camera. And he was a decent fellow. He came back to me this morning and he said, actually, you've got a point. I hadn't thought about that.
Big on him, because I've been faced with that a lot as well. And I've learned quickly that you got to be really careful on how you sort of break that news to people, because they covet it.
Yeah, they do.
It's often just seeing a video like that for them is confirmation, is a life-changing event.
Yeah.
And, for you to be like, well, I genuinely think that's just a reflection of a passing car, or I think that's, finding that debunk is a line to walk as well. It's very finicky with people, and their belief system is attached to it as well.
Absolutely.
And, you're questioning their sanity, their mental faculties. You're questioning their faith. You're questioning all these things. Like, we bring up Chris Bledsoe, for instance. I've spoken to Chris, and I've spent time with him and his family and his son, and I've actually seen something out there. And I documented it when I was with Ryan. We had these row of lights appear right over the ocean. And it was incredible to see. And it was witnessed by other people running down the beach. They called the Coast Guard, because they're like, there's something going on out there. Like, it was a real thing. And, but going from that to, I got to be careful, because the people who do follow Chris Bledsoe are obviously, a lot of them are also linked to religion and faith. And I've known that, like, hey, sometimes when he posts a video, some of these things might have a prosaic explanation. I might not be smart enough to know, if that's a satellite, or if that's space debris, or if that's a real orb. I might not have all that information, but for me, it's always important that people just do it for themselves and go look at the things. But it is a very dangerous place to comment on.
The other thing that I get so frustrated about is when people say to me, do you believe in UFOs? And to me, that's a ridiculous question.
Belief is ridiculous.
Belief is an expression of religious faith. It implies the suspension of knowledge.
Yeah.
It's like when you believe in God.
Yeah.
I mean, fundamentally, you are asked to suspend your faith and just accept that God is real.
Yeah.
Because we can't definitively prove that God is real.
But it's a good exercise.
Sure.
I encourage people all the time on this channel to suspend their disbelief. Let's read through this Psalm 1 document. And suspend your disbelief and suspend your belief.
Sure.
Suspend everything. And let's just take the information, hold it up to the light, see if we can find any connections, and possibly form a hypothesis on what this might be, just as an exercise. But I agree with you. Belief is a detriment to data collection.
Sure.
It is a filter. It is a lens through which things get distorted and biased. Yeah.
And it's why I'm at the point now where when people send me videos, especially with AI, it's almost pointless. Somebody sending me a video now. I don't want to discourage people from sending me videos, but unless there's multiple independent witnesses who are prepared to say, I saw that object, what's recorded on that camera is what I saw, I will sign a statutory declaration and support the fact that that object in the video is what I saw with my own eyes. Or, it's caught on radar traveling at 2,000 miles an hour. That's why I know it's true.
Sure.
And there's a huge problem, I think, with AI now crafting bogus videos to the point where it's next to impossible to decide whether something's real or not.
Getting close to.
Yeah.
Getting close to. Depends on the age demographic. I'll say if you're on Facebook, it's rampant with. I want to get to a question before we get to. I do have some audience questions I want to get to, which are a lot of fun. But I'd be remiss if I didn't, at least address the giant UFO. I'm going to get asked by people, and so I have to follow up. Any updates?
I can't say any more than I've said. I mean, when people know what I was talking about,
sure.
I mean,
Will you say when people know?
They will know. I'm pretty sure it'll become public.
Is it outside of the Five Eyes?
I've never said any location, and I've never seen anything that would convey where it is.
Fair.
It's outside of the continental United States.
Okay.
Representative Eric Burleson has recently indicated a willingness to investigate that allegation. And
really?
Yeah, I mean, I'd point people to what Representative Burleson is talking about, because I'm really heartened by the fact that he's said publicly that he too has heard that this is a classified piece of knowledge.
Is there satellite imagery of some type of architectural or geological flag that would tell us that, that's like, because people on the internet are scouring the internet.
Of course they are, yeah.
We found things in Korea and Greenland and all these different places.
It's not me being smug saying I know something
I'm just trying to see if I can pull anything else that you might be allowed to.
At times, I regret even mentioning it.
I understand why.
Because
it's speculative.
One of the it's not actually speculative in my book.
Oh, it isn't?
No, I'm pretty confident it's real. But what I really think people don't understand is it serves a very, very important national security purpose, and you would not want the fact of the location of this object to be officially linked in any way to the purpose for which it serves at the moment, because it could potentially cause some serious problems for the men and women that work in that facility.
Okay.
And it's interesting because...
Would you see it from space or not?
Oh, you could definitely see it on a satellite.
Okay. Is it architectural?
It's a building. I've said it's a building.
It's a building. Is the building the shape of the craft?
Yeah.
Okay. That's all I wanted to know.
Yeah.
That's a good...
Yeah. And
that's a good hint.
When people hear the purpose of the building and why I've had to be protective, journalistically, one of the things journalists often get accused of doing is being reckless with national security sensitive information. And
you burn your sources.
Well, yeah. I mean, one of the things that's happened from time to time is people have inadvertently revealed, like the whole Valerie Plame story, where ironically a member of an administration revealed the name of somebody who was an undeclared CIA officer. And that was a dangerous risk for that person. It was putting her life at risk. I would never want to do anything like that, because whilst I don't agree with everything that certain intelligence agencies are doing to conceal the legacy program, they do serve as part of the Five Eyes that my country is part of, and your country is part of, and America leads. It serves an incredibly useful purpose in terms of protecting national security and ideally keeping world peace since at least the end of World War II. And so the last thing I want to do is anything that jeopardizes that.
And I wouldn't want you to. And if this is something, you want to straight away get away from, you let me know. But I do want to ask one more question.
Sure.
Was this corroborated by multiple people? Because you say it with such conviction. This isn't like someone dying on the moon here.
No, I'm very confident from multiple sources that this location serves the purpose for which I've described.
These sources are first-hand witnesses?
Yes.
More than two?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah. Well, it's not incredible. It's reality.
I mean, but realities can be incredible.
I mean, the interesting thing is, this is why I think the Trump administration needs to take some leadership here. And this is why, even if Trump's not thinking about making a disclosure in July for the anniversary of Roswell, he bloody well should be. Because there is so much that's leaking right now.
Right. Wow.
And it's not just that site that we're talking about. There are other locations of alleged recoveries of craft in contemporary history which are not yet publicly known. And it's not just Magenta and Kingsman and Aztec and Roswell. These are other locations around the world. And I know the US has investigated them. I've actually seen imagery of scientists investigating one site in particular, and that's something I'm investigating. This is not an isolated incident. The thing that fascinates me about this is there is literally, whatever they are, I don't know whether they're a DOE team, Department of Energy, or whether they're part of the Department of Defense, but there is a team that is deployed to investigate things like this, and it's still ongoing. And these inquiries continue to this day. And I don't know whether it's done through the auspices of some government agency or whether it's run out of private aerospace. All I know is that there is an entity which is incredibly well-resourced, which deploys to investigate these things. And
under like the DOJ or
what, Department of Justice?
Yeah, like who deploys these?
Well, I suspect it's DOE related because, as we know from the Peru story, it was people wearing DOE jackets. But, for example, I've spoken to Special Forces Tier 1 operators from the UK, the US, and Australia who have described to me being involved in what they believe were retrievals, where they've been on operations where, you know, as a soldier, as a grunt, you're not told what you're doing, but it's pretty bloody obvious to you what you're recovering is not normal, prosaic, mundane human technology.
Wow. Last night we spoke about the Esalen Institute as well.
Sure.
Have you shared that information? Has that been shared?
I've talked about this. I mean, I think what you're talking about is prior to the establishment of Skywatcher, there was an event that I was invited to by Alex Clokas, who's one of the co-founders of Skywatcher, along with Jake Barber and James Fowler and others. And Alex was very much the private equity funder who helped bring the money people. And so this was an opportunity to show to potential investors what Skywatcher aspired to do science-wise. And I'd known Alex because we'd spoken multiple times previously. We were friendly, and he invited me to come to Esalen to speak to that audience. And it was quite something because it was a bunch of extremely high net worth people who came in on their private jets. I've never seen so many private jets in one place at one time. And Jake Barber came along as well, as did David Grush, and so did Jordan Jozak, who ended up becoming one of the psionics who was working with Skywatcher. And I'd been talking to Jordan for quite some time, and I introduced Jordan to Jake and to Alex Clokas, and that's how he became to be involved with Skywatcher. And what we were aspiring to do at Esalen was to give Jordan the opportunity to demonstrate psionic inviting. And I freely admit that up until that point, I thought it was probably bullshit.
Yeah, a little woo-woo. Yep.
Yeah, I really did. For me, it just seemed utterly implausible that you could connect human consciousness to something at such a distance and somehow summon it or invite it to come. But at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, before the evening when we were meant to have this inviting session, Jordan came to me and just said, I've got a really clear image in my head of a blue hexagonal craft. He said, it's a blue hexagon, Ross. And I was so struck by what he told me. He said this in front of David Grush, in front of Alex Clokas, and in front of a number of the premier investors. We were sitting in Alex Clokas's hotel room at Esalen, which is a beautiful retreat. If people don't know it, it's the most beautiful place, a gorgeous retreat, spiritual retreat that sits right over the Pacific Ocean, about 3 hours drive south of San Francisco. It's just divine, beautiful location. And for the telling of the story, you need to know that it has hot springs, beautiful pools where people can take their clothes off and sit in the pools. And there was a large group of people who had come, the girlfriends and the boyfriends were all sort of disporting naked in the pool, having a jolly old time. And I was a bit shy. I'm a middle-aged bloke. I was a bit worried about being, accused of leering at all these gorgeous 20-year-old beautiful girls. So I just kept my respectful distance. But we knew that on the other side of the hill from where we had this session on the lawn, there was this party going on, basically, where they were in the hot pools disporting themselves buck naked. And we very seriously sat down on our yoga mats and lay down on the grass, and we were invited to meditate and open our minds to the idea of inviting a non-human intelligence. And Jordan covered his eyes with a blindfold. And within what seemed a few seconds, at about 10:30 at night, he told me at 4 p.m. in the afternoon that we were going to have this sighting of a blue hexagon. And at 10:30 at night, he puts the blindfold over his eyes, and within a few seconds, he says, "I'm engaged." And I said, "What do you mean you're engaged?" He says, "I'm in a craft." And he says, "Horizon." And I look towards the horizon, and there are these two golden white orbs that just appeared on the horizon. And I'll protect the anonymity of people involved. There's a beautiful Chinese businessman of renown in Silicon Valley who stood up spontaneously and goes, "We love you! We love you! Come closer! Come closer!" And as he's doing this, these objects do come closer. And I'm just like, holy hell. And Jordan's just lying there in this prone state.
Oblivious, really,
He's oblivious. He's just meditating. And he tells me later he was inside one of those objects, bringing them closer. And then there's a whole lot of beautiful young boys and girls who stand up, and we're all sort of standing there. And it's quite emotional. I freely admit it's the most incredible feeling. We all had this kind of loving feeling running through us. And I think that was actually really important.
Integral to
yeah. And what Alex had done really well, I felt, was I think one of the things that is commonly lacking in UAPology is the feminine. There's too few women in this subject area. It's too blokey and too male and testosterone-filled and aggressive. What I loved about Esalen was he'd done 50% men, 50% women. And I think that was integral.
By design.
To why it worked. Because the girls balanced it out. There was less male ego and it was more loving, to be perfectly honest with you. And there were all these beautiful young women as well. It was like a fashion show. It was just gorgeous. And as they stood and started entreating these objects to come closer, they indubitably came closer.
How close?
Probably within 150, 200 meters.
That's very close.
Yeah.
That's under 1,000 feet.
Yeah. And it was still hanging over the ocean. And then they just slowly took off and sort of went out of sight. It was over pretty quickly, but the story's not over because I was excited. I thought, wow, that was really something. But I was kind of disappointed for Jordan because we hadn't seen what he said he was going to see, which was the blue hexagon.
Yeah.
And I was sad for him, but I was also annoyed because it kind of disproved my confirmational bias. I'd really hoped to see what he said he was going to see, and it would prove definitively in my mind that this was real. Almost simultaneously at the moment that I'm saying to Jordan, "Gee, real shame that we didn't see the blue hexagon." And he's going, "Yeah, I know. It's really strange. I had a really strong sense that it was going to happen." Literally at the point that he's saying that, somebody comes running up and says, "Ross, Jordan!" So in the end, what we saw, and you can use this photograph at this point, were two sets of images. You see what I can only describe as on the other side of the hill, looking down towards the hot springs. When you get to the top of the hill, you're looking down from the Esalen main meeting room. and you see adjacent to the hot springs, where all these young men and women were buck naked swimming in the hot springs, swirling faces in a kind of a translucent mist.
It's like amorphous sort of.
Yeah. And people who'd been there told me they'd seen that. So it's not just something on the photograph.
Right, it's not a refraction.
Yeah.
An
and
artifact.
then the second image that you'll see here is what happened subsequently, which is a blue hexagonal orb, exactly as Jordan had predicted, sat down further down the beach and just planted itself on the lower part of the beach next to the ocean and just sat there for a while. And it was seen by most of the people who were up that night, looking down probably at 10:30, 11 o'clock at night at that location.
How long did this occur? How long was this there for? Do you remember?
Not very long,
And then
probably
did it just
10 or 20
disappear?
seconds.
Did it take off? Do you remember how it left?
I don't know. I can't remember. That's
Right.
the weird thing about it.
That is strange.
Yeah. But
It's clearly a hexagon when you look at the photo as well, because
absolutely.
this isn't like you can count the sides.
Yeah.
It's not.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very clear, structured, translucent.
And there seems to be something around it also. It
Yeah.
seems to be like like you hear about this cube in a sphere type, description from,
So that was where
Ryan Graves. It's
I have to
similar.
admit, a lot of people ask me, have I ever had a sort of an ontological moment where I've gone, holy hell?
That's got to be one.
That was it for me. That was where I was going, crikey, there might just be something to this, And I sort of looked at Jordan. I think he was pleasantly surprised as well, and kind of relieved, because it gave him the credibility. And I suspect that might have been instrumental for why he went on to become, I think, one of the lead psionics for Skywatcher.
Short-lived, though.
Short-lived, yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. As many of you know who watch at home, if you want to have an opportunity to, ask our guest a question, one of the many perks that we offer here in the membership is that opportunity. So sign up if you like. If not, enjoy these questions. Here we go. A lot of fun ones here. We may have covered some of these too, but from Stan B.
Did you leave anything out of In Plain Sight you didn't believe back then, but you've changed your mind on since then?
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, no, definitely. I didn't believe that we were capable of shooting down, possibly killing non-human intelligences. It just seemed preposterous to me. It seemed like a wacky conspiracy theory.
You were aware of it while writing?
I was.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, what happened to me was actually quite extraordinary. I had this idea of writing letters as a way of getting in touch with people, because I knew I've done stories myself on intrusive surveillance. I'm really fascinated with spying and communications interception. And there's a spy system called Echelon, which I revealed exclusively was an official program 25 years ago on a show for Channel 9 Australia in collaboration with a British investigative journalist called Duncan Campbell. And Echelon is essentially a communications surveillance operation run by the Yakuza, UK, USA, with the Yakuza agreement, not the Japanese mafia.
Oh,
and
I was thinking, how do they insert themselves into this?
And it's the Five Eyes Alliance, basically, the UK-USA agreement. And essentially, I was tipped by sources in Australian intelligence that we were part of this spying operation where, communications surveillance happens. And it made me realize just how wide open spying is and how easy it is to break into anybody's communications. And so it just seemed preposterous to me when I was investigating for my book. I'd been told by people as part of my research that the best way to communicate with people was to write a letter. And so I wrote about 160 letters to people. And I did a lot of work in universities looking at thesis documents that had been written by people in aerospace. I went to certain libraries and accessed papers that had been written by people when they were young graduate students who I assumed might very well have gone into the program. And I was essentially looking for people who...
Seems like a leap. That seems like a wild leap to like...
It worked.
Yeah, that blows my mind.
It worked because people who'd been writing about propulsion systems 25 years earlier, some of those people responded. And that was essentially a way of providing them with some degree of security that their communications weren't being intercepted. And so, to make the point, very early on in my research, I became aware that there was this program. And it seemed preposterous to me that there was this program, but I knew that it existed. And that was also because I'd met a guy called Nat Coulthart, who was a director of science technology development for the US Navy for 30-something years. Very, very senior guy who, when I wrote him a letter, it just turned out that he was sadly dying from cancer. And he calculated that he had nothing to lose by talking to me. And so he very candidly assisted me with my investigations and gave me the names of people to speak to and helped open the door for me. So I became aware very early on that there were allegations that craft were being shot down. At that time, I wasn't even aware of the psionic connection. Nobody had told me about that. And it just made no sense to me that we would act militarily to shoot down a craft. It just seemed like a preposterous story. And then, because of these letters that I'd written, people were reaching out to me. I suddenly realized I was getting multiple corroborative sources telling me the same thing. And that's where I started learning about psionics. And that was something else that I didn't believe back then.
It's shocking.
It really is. It's like, we're flying. It was like Flight of the Navigator.
Yeah, correct.
I mean, it felt like a Hollywood movie.
Well, in that movie as well, there is this child at a NASA facility interacting with like these oscilloscopes and trying to get them to this sounds like the Dan Sherman stuff. It's wildly predictive.
Yeah. And I mean, I just wonder sometimes, my friend Bryce Zabel, who I did a podcast with called Need to Know for a very long time, he told me that he's aware, and they're doing a podcast themselves, actually, he and his former colleague with Dark Skies, the TV series that they made. They're doing a podcast very soon that's going to be going into detail about how the Pentagon, the intelligence community try and manipulate Hollywood movies to plant ideas. I'm really looking forward to it. It's going to be really interesting.
Predictive programming. And
and I think there's a lot of that kind of seeding that takes place.
Oh, yeah. And that's, the crazy part is there's no secret there. Like, we all know that the CIA was involved during and post-war to sort of attenuate a lot of these stressful feelings that people had at home in regards to the war, the Cold War.
Sure.
People were scared, and they're like, how do we appease, the population? Well, give them romance, give them Casablanca, give them all these, and that's what they did.
Sure.
All right. Great question there, Stan. Yes, I love this question by Alice Alien.
From Alice Alien, you get the chance to be the first Earthling to interview an ET.
What 3 questions would you ask? I would ask what 1 question would you ask, but feel free to elaborate on any other questions.
I would certainly ask them whether they created humans.
Ooh, good one.
I would ask them whether they believe that they transcend their physical bodies and have a consciousness that survives after death, which I think is integral to this whole ET story.
I do too.
And the third question I would ask would be, who are the bad guys and who are the good guys?
Those are great questions. Leave it to a seasoned professional to run laps around this alien. Oh my gosh. That first question is really interesting too. If you look at different species that we describe, some of which look like us, some of which are these grays or the Mantids or the Reptilians or what have you, they all seem to be bipedal
forward-facing eyes, multiple digits on their fingers, the chance of evolutionary convergence creating
Michael Masters, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. It looks like we're all part of a family at the very least.
Sure.
I wouldn't go so far as the time travel stuff. I'm not 100% convinced that's how time works, but I do subscribe to the idea that reptilians, mantids, these humanoid, you can find all these things on Earth.
Sure.
You can find all their ancestors or whatever on Earth, right? So it makes me think that like this is some cosmic zoo that we're all sharing DNA on these other planets, shifting them around.
I agree. And it's also, I'm fascinated, as you know, with ancient megalithic ruins. And to me, it's just completely absurd to say that humanity built the pyramids. I do think that the pyramids are a hell of a lot older. I think it was a prior civilization.
How far would you estimate, like 20, 30,000 years back or further?
Well, the experts that I've engaged with, I wouldn't speak for myself, but the experts that I've engaged with say anything between 10 to 100,000 plus years.
Wow.
And certainly it's way back to at least the time of the Younger Dryas when there was flooding, because we know that the last time there was water around the Sphinx, and there is evidence of water around the Sphinx.
26,000 years ago or something?
12,500.
12,500?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's like this erosion at the base of the Sphinx that, I saw it too. That's incredible.
So nobody explains that. And I don't like the way that Egyptian archaeology is dominated by Zahi Hawass, Dr. Zahi Hawass, and the way he's controlled the narrative with archaeologists. And I've spoken to archaeologists who've told me that they've been told flatly by Hawass that they're not to release certain reports, otherwise they won't be given access to certain sites, which is appalling. And I do think, to make the point, that there is evidence of prior civilizations, and I don't think it's at all unlikely, frankly, as impossible as this may sound, when you look at the rock art on the walls in rocks in Utah and in Australia, you're looking at beings that are most certainly not human. And dare I say, some of them look mantid, insectoid. Is it possible that the insects became the dominant apex species and evolved to have intelligence? And is it possible that they went off planet and maybe they're the mantids? I've got no idea, but I don't rule that out.
No.
Because one of the things I'm fascinated by is evolutionary science. When you squeeze an evolutionary scientist, there's a guy I interviewed probably 35 years ago called Professor Michael Denton, and he's an evolutionary scientist evolutionary biologist who has challenged the idea that the theory of evolution is anything more than a hypothesis. And he doesn't think you can adequately explain the rate of development, for example, of the human forebrain, which essentially turned us from primitive hominids into advanced, technologically clever beings. You can't explain that with just simple mutations. The levels of mutation and the time involved just can't be explained. And there aren't also the cross species, the transition species, the fossils for those transition species that you would expect to find. So I do
There's interference.
I think there's been interference. And I speculate there. I don't know for sure. But did something give us a cosmic shove?
Yeah. Yeah, I would tend to agree with that, and I think that like if you if we extrapolate on our own sort of projections as to what we're trying to do, we're trying to become this spacefaring civilization that exists on an interplanetary basis. We're trying to go to Mars. We're trying to exit the solar system, exit the galaxy potentially, or whatever it is. If you were capable of doing that, bouncing around the universe at will, you wouldn't stop at just one planet either.
No.
It makes no sense to me. That seems to be like an ego issue with a lot of people that think that we're special. And although we might be, I don't think that we're necessarily unique.
Absolutely.
I think if you were a very intelligent species, you would have done the same thing you've done here to 1 trillion planets if you had the capability to preserve that flame of consciousness and hopefully also probably run tests. Like if we go to if we do any tests on another planet, we're not sending a probe there to just take soil samples and leave. we're doing 1,000 tests.
Sure.
So, there might be 1,000 different things happening here that they're taking notes on that they've shifted a little bit from planet B over here. And that doesn't make us not special.
Absolutely.
But it does put us into a broader sort of perspective with these other things. And again, I'm not afraid to admit I'm not the apex. I think some people might be afraid of that.
I think most certainly we are not.
Yeah, most certainly we are not, and not even close. All right. Okay. This one was gonna come up. Patient meaning.
Asks, after all your conversations in confidence, do you believe something is coming in 2027?
Again, that's an inquiry about my belief. It's not my inquiry about knowledge.
Yes.
I'm in no position to say that I know something. There are people who have speculated to me, people who purportedly have inside knowledge, who may or may not be right, who have said that something is happening in 2027. Other people have said 2034. Other people have admitted to me they really have no bloody idea, but they do think something is coming.
Have any of those people been on this podcast?
Yes.
Okay. All right. That's interesting. Yeah, what do you make of that? Do you think that could be some type of psyop? Do you think that the people who tell you that could have been psyoped as well?
Yeah, it could be. And I think what it might be is an attempt by the pro-disclosure people to inject some urgency into the debate about whether or not there should or shouldn't be disclosure.
I see.
What I'm told is that there's a higher degree of uncertainty about what it is that is speculated to be coming than people acknowledge.
Okay,
and also I know the inevitable question is, what do you know is coming? And I don't know anything. People speculate that there's natural disasters, comets, some kind of catastrophe. I've got no idea.
But then
I
also
don't even know if it's true.
This sort of idea of this giant craft coming. We had that that 3IA Atlas, we had Oumuamua, like all of these sort of interstellar objects entering our solar system. Do you think, have you been told by these people in confidence what this might be, or are they also uncertain? They're just like, something's coming.
I've heard so many contradictory accounts. All I know is people murmur and mumble that, something's on the horizon. Don't quite know.
They've been doing that for a long time.
I know. And I just wonder whether it's just Pentagon tittle-tattle. I really do. I
fear-mongering.
No, not fear-mongering, just tittle-tattle.
I see.
I mean, believe it or not, intelligence people, spooks, they gossip just as much as we do.
Yeah.
They love gossip, and spies gossip. They really do. They love gossip. And I think there's a lot of that behind what we're talking about here.
We've lived through a bunch of these disasters, by the way. Y2K, 2012, there's 2021. There was a lot of...
I think we're entitled to be skeptical, but I also don't think we should be complacent. But also, I mean, to be honest with you, the world does need a reset right now, frankly. I'm not talking about a catastrophe, but I do think humanity's heading into a very dangerous place. I wouldn't be surprised at all if there was a nuclear war. I mean, we are closer to nuclear apocalypse than at any other time in our history. And the world is so blasé about that. When I was an 18-year-old punk, I genuinely thought while I was at university there really wasn't much point in finishing my studies because I knew we were going to die in a thermonuclear war. There was this movie called The Day After, which presented this incredibly grim idea of what was going to happen when war broke out. And it seemed inevitable that war was going to happen. Thankfully, we survived that one. But now people don't realize this. The doomsday clock, which is presented by the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, is closer now than at any other time in our history, including the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Wow.
They think right now is more dangerous than the Cuban Missile Crisis when we came literally to the brink of nuclear war. So I don't think we need a natural catastrophe, be it a comet or a pole reversal or whatever it is that they're talking about. Maybe it's alien spaceships arriving and shooting us all up. We are primitive apes, warlike apes. We are capable of destroying ourselves. And I think, frankly, that's the bigger theme that we should be concerned about.
Yep, good point. And one point that I like to make when bringing up the topic of like nuclear disasters is that, okay, the one thing that advanced technology the most was war, right? This obviously is the reality that we live in. We go to war, we create amazing technology. I'd be a fool to think that we've come a long way in every other aspect of technology except killing. And so I have to assume that whatever we have now, if we're rocking iPhones in our pockets, makes the nukes look like toys.
And have you noticed that Trump keeps on dropping these hints?
Yes, the discombobulator.
Yeah, I mean, most recently with Venezuela, he talked about this discombobulator, and clearly it's some kind of acoustic device that completely incapacitated the Cuban soldiers who were defending Maduro.
Bleeding, and they were just...
But he has also, and so has Putin, spoken specifically about some kind of superweapon. Both sides have boasted publicly about a weapon that you couldn't even dream of.
And that's what I fear more than nuclear war. I feel like there's something that might be able to tear a hole in the fabric of everything.
Scalar technology.
Exactly, yeah. Well, terrifying. All right, moving on. I think we got one or two more here. Oh, love this question. It's a really good question by T.H. Perry.
It's a great way of keeping the question short to make sure it fits onto your screen.
130 characters, including your name.
T.H. Perry, is there a piece of information you wish you were never told?
Yeah, there is.
Can you share that?
I can't tell you the information, but I can tell you what it is.
Okay.
I was given the names of, and it wasn't Jake, I was given the names of people who ordered the murder of his team.
And you wish you had never received that information because it obviously puts you in danger.
Yeah, I was worried for my family. I was genuinely freaked out that I knew something that was a disgusting secret. I mean, somebody had ordered a hit. And I took steps to make sure that if anything did happen to me, it would become public. And by the way, so did Jake.
Understood. Great question, Perry. Hope that satisfies you. Last one here. I think this is from Hara, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. Okay. An easy question to answer. A nice one to leave us with here. Thank you, Hara, for this question.
I like nice questions.
Would you rather interview a reptilian, a Nordic, or a gray? And I'll throw Mantis up there.
Well, apparently the Nordics are really cute. You know, they're gorgeous. I have to admit, I'm tempted to say a reptilian.
Ooh.
And the reason why is because I talk to a lot of experiences, people who purport to have had contact with beings. And the reptilians seem to have a sense of humor.
You think they'd be better to share a pint with?
Yeah. I mean, they sound like interesting guys and girls. So, yeah, I think the reptilians. And it's interesting because humans don't realize. I mean, I read Arthur Koestler when I was a boy, and he wrote a book. He was a German philosopher, and he wrote a book about how there's essentially a fault built into the human being, that we are essentially a reptilian brain and a more advanced hominid brain, a forebrain that's been built onto the front of that reptilian brain, the neocortex. And he theorized that there's this incompatibility between that old reptilian brain, which is very impulsive and emotional, and this newer human
That's so
neocortex.
interesting.
And I remember reading this as a kid and thinking, wow, that's a really cool idea. And then reading the biology about it and the fact that, yeah, we do. We've got a relic of our reptilian ancestors in our body.
I've always struggled with this idea of the dichotomy of the two beings that live within us. And one of them, on one hand, is this beautiful, empathetic sort of intelligence with foresight and just, empathy and all of this, beautiful knowledge and this other side of us is just the complete opposite. This acting on instinct. It likes sex. It likes decadence. It likes greed. It feels guilty. It has all these it wants to kill. It wants to harm.
Let's be honest about it. That reptilian side's a lot more interesting. They sound more fun. They really do. I don't like the evil side, but they sound fascinating.
But there is a nature where they meet and you go, man, we are really two species. Like on one hand, we'll give in to these impulses. And then with the same stroke, we'll punish ourselves for having them.
Absolutely.
And it's like, wait, that's part of us too. Yeah. Like we're like, oh, you shouldn't touch that. You're like, oh, but I want to touch that. Okay, well, Ross, you've been obviously a gentleman, a scholar. I thank you so much for coming here. But more importantly, I want to thank you for everything you do. And I want to thank you for being here on this planet and sharing with us your accumulated wealth of knowledge, your incredible work ethic, and your empathy and understanding towards all, not just the UAP stuff, but all the wars that humans are fighting within us and without us.
Thank you so much to you and your audience. It's been fun being on Area 52. I now know what happens behind the scenes. It's great.
Thank you, Ross.